Chapter 136. After the first cooperation, the next few hunts went much smoother. At the same time, these young warriors became more cautious. Xiao Xian didn't join them. Sometimes, he even let Caesar go with them. He didn't give Caesar more instructions. You don't care about Caesar anymore? Lang Jie was very curious. Since the giant bear, Xiao Xian had let Caesar move freely for several hunts. I'm training it to be independent. Caesar is very smart. Sometimes, it can even help Yang Guang and the others. Xiao Xian said, "Didn't you always tell them to be dependent on each other? Why are you talking about independence now?" The specific situation needs to be analyzed. Different methods have to be used at different times. Xiao Xian answered. Since he couldn't understand, Lang Jie decided to stop thinking about it. He wanted to see what the other beasts were hunting. Xiao Xian stood on a tree and looked at a small stream in front of the tree. There were falling leaves and some broken twigs on the stream. The ancient people thought the fallen leaves were boats, and when they saw the black wood floating on it, they knew it was a boat. In fact, a boat was not as hard to make as Xiao Xian thought. A tree was enough. In the forest, there were many thick trees. A section of the tree trunk could be made into a canoe. However, the material of the tree still needed to be checked. The appearance of these beasts in the forest didn't attract the attention of the high-level ferocious beasts in their own territories. For them, these are just a few small beasts. They didn't care about them. Mai led the hunting team and these beasts from the first stronghold to the third. Although there were many small troubles along the way, the overall journey was quite smooth. For the members of the hunting group, this was also a novel hunting trip. Jiao! An eagle's cry came from the sky. Xiao Xian looked up. Cha-Cha wanted to fly to another place. When they arrived at the hunting ground of the third stronghold, 2/3 of the hunting time had passed. The hunting team wouldn't go far. Moreover, if they went further, they wouldn't be familiar with the terrain and species composition. Therefore, under normal circumstances, they would stay here for a few days and then turn around and go back. However, Cha-Cha seemed to want to keep flying forward. If it weren't for Xiao Xian, it would have flown away long ago. In the sky, Cha-Cha had already told Xiao Xian with its unique flight path that it wanted to go there. Cha-Cha showed its strong desire to go in that direction when it came to the third stronghold. Uncle Mai, do you know where it is? Xiao Xian asked, pointing at the direction Cha-Cha wanted to fly to. Mai thought for a while and shook his head. I think I heard the old warriors mention it a long time ago. I can't remember. I only know that it's not a place we can go. I think it's called the Severing Land. Cha-Cha Land. Yes. Mai answered vaguely. He really couldn't remember. But when he was young, he heard other old warriors talking about it, saying that they couldn't go there. Since the ancestors stopped here and didn't go further, they must have their reasons. Out of their complete trust in their ancestors, every leader of the hunting group would not go any further after they arrived at this place. Even if they wanted to expand, they wouldn't go in that direction. Don't go there. Mai stared at Xiao Xian. He needed Xiao Xian's promise. After a pause, Xiao Xian nodded. Okay, I know. I won't go there. Mai finally smiled when he heard Xiao Xian's promise. He looked at the sky and waved to Xiao Xian. Time to go back. Xiao Xian whistled, and then made a gesture to Cha-Cha in the sky. Jiao! Cha-Cha screamed unwillingly. It flew around the same place for a few more times, and then followed Xiao Xian back to the cave of the third stronghold. Because of its bad mood, it fought with an unknown bird on the way back. Unfortunately, the bird was more skillful. It only suffered a few scratches from Cha-Cha, while Cha-Cha was not only injured but also bald. Mai felt even worse. Xiao Xian comforted it while applying medicine to Cha-Cha. When we go back, I'll ask the shaman what's over there. If it's okay, I'll take you there. As the return day was approaching, the hunters began to feel anxious. Although they felt that their beasts did a good job this time, they didn't fight, didn't cause any trouble to the hunting team, and even helped them to hunt a lot of prey. However, in the end, the only thing that was presented to the shaman was the animal skin roll in Xiao Xian's hand. Especially Lei. He had a conflict with Xiao Xian before, so he was worried that Xiao Xian would hold a grudge against him. Thinking of what other people did when he was angry, Lei dragged out a ferocious beast. This ferocious beast level was not high, but it was the only ferocious beast that he and Meng had caught. In Meng's current situation, he could only catch wild beasts by himself. Xiao Xian looked at the prey in front of him and didn't know what to say for a long time. Was this blatant bribery? He had a lot of thoughts. Not only Lei, but the others also dragged their prey to Xiao Xian when they saw what Lei did. Guang's forest raccoon walked to Xiao Xian, shook its neck twice, and then lowered its head and spat out a piece of undigested bone in front of Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian, seeing that Xiao Xian's expression was not very good, Yang Guang and his sister hurried to pull the forest raccoons away. Xiao Xian didn't record these bribes in the animal skin roll, but when he returned to the tribe and reported to the shaman, he said that these beasts were the reward for this trip. The shaman didn't care about this. He took the animal skin roll handed to him by Xiao Xian and studied it for 3 days. Lei Mao, Yang Guang, and his sister didn't know that Xiao Xian also recorded some pictures in the form of Wu roll when he was recording. And these pictures were the scenes of these beasts hunting prey with their unique hunting methods. The advantages and disadvantages, as well as the temperament of these beasts, could be clearly seen from the recorded words and the shaman's drawings. Xiao Xian didn't need to say much. After the first time, the shaman didn't make a decision immediately. Later, the shaman arranged several times to let these beasts stay in the same hunting group, but they didn't stay in Mai's hunting group, but changed their hunting routes one by one. Xiao Xian also followed the shaman's instructions one by one. He was lucky enough to walk around the hunting routes of other hunting groups and had a general understanding of the distribution of species on each hunting group's hunting routes. After each hunting trip, Xiao Xian also drew a more specific map. On this map, roughly where there were wild beasts, ferocious beasts, where there were more herbs, where there were huge trees, etc., were all marked. Xiao Xian didn't tell anyone except the shaman. Even old Ke didn't know. Several times when Xiao Xian went to other hunting groups, he took Caesar and Cha-Cha with him. After following the hunting routes of other hunting groups to the third location, Cha-Cha showed a strong yearning for a certain direction again and wanted to fly in that direction. But for the other times, it didn't do so. Xiao Xian asked the shaman why this happened, but the shaman didn't give a definite answer. He said that he would read the Wu roll records left by his ancestors to see if there were any detailed records. Before the situation was clear, Xiao Xian wouldn't take Cha-Cha to that place easily. Who knew what would be there? Could they come back safely? Because the shaman had talked with Lei and Mao, who had raised wild beasts that tried their best to hunt as much food as possible before the winter. This winter, the shaman engraved the beasts one by one, except for Caesar and Cha-Cha. During the engraving process, the shaman called Xiao Xian over and planned to let Xiao Xian do it if he couldn't hold on. Gui Zhe, as the next shaman, was also called over to watch. The engraving site was right next to the fire pit. In order to ensure enough spiritual power during the engraving process, Xiao Xian was responsible for throwing fire crystals into the fire pit. It was snowing heavily, but there was no snowflake around, not even a drop of melted rain. Compared to other places on the mountain, the fire pit next to the fire pit was like a big heater. Xiao Xian threw a fire crystal into the fire pit and watched the red energy floating towards the shaman and himself. As for Gui Zhe, she hadn't awakened, so she couldn't absorb the energy of the fire crystal. Let's start, the shaman said. The first one to be brought over was Lei's beast named Meng. The people who brought Meng left quickly, and Lei couldn't stay here, so they waited in another stone house. At the top of the mountain, there were only the shaman, Xiao Xian, and Gui Zhe by the fire pit. The shaman sat on the animal skin blanket, looking at the wild beast that was a little taller than him, and reached out his hand. The familiar two-horned flame totem appeared in the shaman's palm, and the blue totem gradually took shape, but it took longer than Xiao Xian. When the totem was completely formed, the shaman was sweating profusely. Fortunately, the energy of the fire crystal could be replenished quickly. This time, the shaman didn't have to guard against the surrounding dangers like Xiao Xian did that night. He was very safe here. The process was similar to what Xiao Xian did, but after the totem was formed, it took longer to imprint it. Fortunately, The totem didn't disperse when the last bit was imprinted, and this step was completed. At the moment when the totem was completed, the shaman was exhausted and fell down. If Xiaoxian didn't react quickly and caught him, the shaman would have fallen directly on the stone beside the fire pit. After the first totem, the shaman found that he could only hold on to one totem. It would take a longer time to imprint all 7 beasts. After one totem, he had to rest for a few days before he could imprint the next one. When the last totem was imprinted, almost half of the winter had passed. According to the ancient scroll, the success rate of imprinting the accompanying hunting dogs was only half. The shaman was prepared, but he didn't expect that all 7 beasts would be successfully imprinted. Although there were 4 times when the totem was almost scattered, it quickly condensed in the end, and the totem was imprinted. The 7 beasts were also in good condition. In one winter, the 7 beasts imprinted by the shaman all grew up. However, they didn't change as much as Caesar did. Just like what was recorded in the animal skin scroll passed down by the ancestors, after the totem was imprinted, it was a gradual process that was relatively slow. At the same time, compared to the 7 beasts who were getting better and better, Cha-Cha was listless all day long. For Cha-Cha, who was usually full of energy, this was a very rare situation. Was it because it was the only exception among the 9 beasts in the tribe? However, the shaman said that Cha-Cha couldn't imprint. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but that he couldn't. Xiaoxian tried once, but he couldn't do it. The shaman also said that Cha-Cha was a real giant mountain eagle, and giant mountain eagles had their own beliefs. Chapter 137. In the winter, the 7 beasts that had been successfully engraved by the shaman had gradually begun to change their shape and appearance. Although the shaman had reminded them to prepare more food before the winter, the 7 beasts had grown up and their appetites had become bigger. The food still could not satisfy them. After all, with the increase of their level, the energy they needed would also change. It was just like the intermediate and senior totem warriors were not interested in the meat of ordinary beasts, because the meat could not satisfy their hunger. Until the end of the winter, each of the beasts looked like Caesar when he had just been engraved. The originally fat beasts had become very skinny. Even the fat on Sia's body was worn down. After the winter, as in previous years, it was the most important sacrificial ceremony in the whole tribe. According to the records passed down by the ancestors, the beasts that had been successfully engraved could participate in the sacrificial ceremony, and the fire would no longer reject them. Therefore, on the day of the sacrificial ceremony, except for Cha-Cha, the other 8 beasts were brought to the top of the mountain and stood beside the fire pit. Participating in the sacrificial ceremony meant that they had officially become members of the tribe. This was a very strange scene. It could even be said that this was the only time in hundreds of years that people and accompanying beasts had participated in the sacrificial ceremony together. Everyone was very excited, because they were luckier than the ancestors to be able to witness such a scene with their own eyes. After the ceremony, the shaman recorded it in detail in the form of Wu Roll. This was also one of his great achievements since he became the shaman. It was something that could be passed down from generation to generation. It was worth remembering. In contrast, Cha-Cha, who was left at home and needed to avoid the fire of the fire, looked more bleak. Although its appetite was not reduced, its spirit was not as good as before. After the sacrificial ceremony, the coldness of winter gradually disappeared. From the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, it became lively. A few days before the first hunting, several beasts that had been engraved would often go down a mountain for a walk. When they were young, they were often bullied by Cha-Cha, except for the falcon in Gigu's hand and the turtle in Gue Zhe's place. All of them were caught by Cha-Cha several times in the air. Now that they had become ferocious beasts or were close to becoming ferocious beasts, they were naturally not afraid of the Cha-Cha. If not for the fact that the Cha-Cha could fly, they would have probably retaliated. Fortunately, Caesar protected her and did not allow those few to tease the Cha-Cha. It was reasonable to say that Caesar was completely inferior to the others when they were all wild beasts. Even in the large wolf species, they were a relatively weak subgroup and were not as fierce as the others. But in fact, after the engraving was completed and he grew into a ferocious beast, Caesar's growth was much better than that of the other 7. Neither the cave lion Chi nor Mao dared to provoke Caesar. Cha-Cha continued to squat in its nest as it watched the minions that it had once bullied become stronger one by one. Seeing this situation, Xiao was helpless. When the shaman had almost finished teaching this batch of newly awakened warriors, Xiao went up the mountain again to have a good chat with the shaman. I plan to take Cha-Cha to have a look over there during this hunting trip. Xiao sat opposite the shaman and said. The shaman understood what Xiao meant by over there, so he remained silent. After a while, he went to the inner room and took out an animal skin roll. He handed it to Xiao and said, "This is recorded in the ancient scroll left by our ancestors." After Xiao told the shaman about Cha-Cha last year, the shaman carefully read the ancient scroll and extracted some relevant records. Xiao took the animal skin roll and looked at the written records. These were only ordinary written records, and obviously, they were retold by others. The description was a little vague. It also mentioned the severing land that Mai had mentioned. When the ancestors opened up the hunting route, they were blocked by a thorny plant and could not go any further. However, when they stood at a high place, they could vaguely see the mountains in the distance, but because of the plant in the middle, they could not go any further. Therefore, the ancestors called that place the severing land. It cut off the road between the mountains and prevented anyone from entering. However, there were also some interesting things mentioned in the scroll. The shaman said that Cha-Cha was a giant mountain eagle, and the giant mountain eagles had their own belief and source of power. Xiao did not know much about it before, so this animal skin roll had some information. It was said that the giant mountain eagle's power came from the snow abyss. It was a huge mountain covered in ice and snow all year round, so people called it the Eagle Mountain. Chief Ao once said that the giant mountain eagles came from the Eagle Mountain, but now it seemed that it was not true. The Eagle Mountain was the source of their power. As for whether it was the place where they were born, no one knew. A long time ago, the ancestors had only heard about the legends of the giant mountain eagles, but had never seen them with their own eyes. Some people said that the Eagle Mountain was the eagle's graveyard, while others said that the Eagle Mountain was the eagle's birthplace. There was not much information on the animal skin roll, so Xiao finished reading it quickly. Is the place where Cha-Cha wants to go to the Eagle Mountain? Xiao was puzzled. Maybe, the shaman said. After thinking for a while, Xiao said, I still want to go with it. The shaman looked at Xiao and was silent for a while. Then he said, It's very dangerous. You may not be able to come back. I know. Xiao had made up his mind, so he would not change it. I'll have to trouble you to talk to Uncle Mai. The shaman did not try to persuade him again. He just sighed. Knowing that the shaman agreed with his decision, Xiao grinned and bowed. Don't worry, I'll come back safely. The shaman felt his eyelids twitch. He waved his hand helplessly and signaled Xiao to go out. It was the first hunt of the year, and there were several ferocious beasts in the team. Whether it was Ta or the 5 team leaders, they all wanted to perform well. Mai was excitedly discussing the upcoming hunt with Xiao when he heard the news brought by Xiao. You want to go to the severing land? Mai's facial muscles twitched, and he said it word by word. He took a few deep breaths and clenched his fists. He wanted to beat up the person in front of him. He knew that Xiao was not a person who would give up easily. Last year's promise was nothing. This time, he directly asked the shaman for help, and the shaman agreed. What else could they say? No, it should be the mountain range on the other side of the severing land. It could be somewhere else. I just want to have a look and see why Cha-Cha always wants to go there. Xiao explained. It would have been better if he did not explain. Once he explained, Chiao Mai and his wife became more worried. They admired the warrior's fearless spirit, but it did not mean that they liked to see such suicidal things. Even their ancestors did not want to go there. How could Xiao, who is not even a mid-level totem warrior, come back? How annoying. How annoying. However, this matter was not made public. It was not until the hunting group went out from the first hunting area to the 3rd hunting area that they knew about it. The severing land? You can't go there. Xian, listen to Mai. Don't go there. You can't come back if you go there. Really, don't go there. If Cha-Cha really wants to go there, he could just fly there himself. Why do you have to follow him? Everyone in the hunting group tried to persuade Xiao Xian. After years of living together, they had become closer to Xiao Xian. They also thought highly of Xiao Xian, a new warrior. What was more, Xiao Xian was born in a cave near the mountain foot area, but he was not inferior to those people in the mountain. This made them feel proud and proud. In the eyes of many old warriors in the mountain foot area, Xiao Xian's future achievements would not be inferior to those people in the mountain. In the future, he might even live in the mountain. Many of them often used Xiao Xian to encourage their children. For example, Sai's father. Every time he saw that Sai was not doing well, he would use Xiao Xian to criticize him. So, until now, Sai had never looked at Xiao Xian in a good way. But now, Xiao Xian wanted to go to the place that even their ancestors did not want to go. Wasn't he looking for death? Unfortunately, persuasion was useless. How could a shaman agree? No one could understand. But since the shaman agreed, they did not insist on persuading him. Mai called Xiao Xian alone to talk, and gave some good stone spearheads to Xiao Xian. Uncle Mai, if I still don't come back in 6 days, don't wait for me. Xiao Xian said. Mai wanted to say something, but stopped. In the end, he nodded. Xiao Xian did not plan to take Caesar with him this time. He told old Ku about this matter. If he could come back, it would be fine. If not, old Ku still had Caesar to accompany him. The day before the hunting trip, Xiao Xian did not take Caesar with him. Instead, he left Caesar in the tribe. When Xiao Xian left, Caesar still followed him for some distance. After being scolded by Xiao Xian, Caesar reluctantly stopped. After saying goodbye to the hunting group, Xiao Xian called Cha-Cha. Then, holding Cha-Cha's feet, he was carried by Cha-Cha and left through the air. The forest ahead was not easy to pass, and the road was not easy to walk on. It was also time-consuming, but it was different in the air. There were not many large birds in the area ahead. When Cha-Cha stood on the ground, he was slightly taller than Xiao Xian's shoulder. Therefore, it was not too difficult for him to carry Xiao Xian. After flying through the forest, Xiao Xian found that there were fewer animals in the forest. Half a day later, Xiao Xian saw this severing land mentioned in the ancient scroll. It was an expanse of brambles that were the color of rust. Brambles that were thick like water tanks, and brambles that were covered in hard thorns that were like the tips of blades interweaved together, causing one to shrink back at the sight of it. It was like a terrifying forest that practically obstructed everything. In the gaps of the thorns near the ground, there were some small but dangerous creatures. Their blood-red eyes were like evil spirits, staring at every creature that flew over the thorns. Even the ferocious beasts in other parts of the forest would not set foot here. Looking at the endless brambles in front of him, and then looking at the quickly flashing figures in the gaps of the brambles, Xiao Xian decided to take a rest first. He would wait for Cha-Cha to accumulate his strength before flying over. Chapter 138. Before they set off, Xiao Xian had brought some jerky with him, but Cha-Cha liked to eat fresh. After Cha-Cha caught some prey and ate to its heart's content, it took Xiao Xian to fly again. Occasionally, a large bird would fly past this area. A few times, it fought with Cha-Cha, and Xiao Xian almost fell from the sky. If Cha-Cha was a little bigger, Xiao Xian could still stand on its back. Unfortunately, Cha-Cha was still too small. Xiao Xian twisted his body to avoid the awl-like beak of the bird. With one hand holding Cha-Cha's claw, he quickly took out the prepared stone needles from the animal skin pouch at his waist and threw them at the attacking birds. The stone needles had been dipped in a special grass juice, which had an extremely strong paralyzing effect. Xiao Xian always aimed at the parts of the body that the thick feathers of the attacking birds could not completely cover. As long as the skin was slightly broken, the medicine would seep in and take effect, and the birds would no longer chase after him. The birds that attacked Xiao Xian in front of him shook their heads and slowed down after being hit. They could not tell which direction they were flying in. However, this bird's resistance was probably not as strong as the ones before it. After being hit by the needle near its neck, it wobbled and flew up and down, then suddenly fell down. When it finally flapped its wings and stopped falling, It crashed into an arch bridge that was surrounded by thorns and thorns. Bang! The strong collision made the bird, which was already dizzy, even more dizzy. The thorns on the thorns also scraped off many of its feathers. The bird that was hit by the needle and hit the arch bridge was scratched by the thorns. Blood dripped down drop by drop. In the thorns, the creatures that smelled the blood immediately became excited. They nimbly passed through the crisscrossing thorns and ran towards the source of the blood. When Xiao Xian looked down from above, he saw the figures that quickly passed through the thorns from all directions, converging towards the bird that was still fluttering in the thorns. The creatures that swarmed over quickly surrounded the flying bird. They looked like monkeys, and their fur was the same color as the thorns. Most of them were only the size of 2 fists of an adult warrior, but they were very nimble. Even when they were in the thorns, they were very fast. The group of monkeys that lived in the thorns, densely packed, pounced on the bird and bit it. For a moment, Xiao Xian could only see a bloody mist exploding in that area. The blood splattered on the surrounding thorns. After it dried, it would probably be the same color as the thorns. Feathers floated in the bloody mist, one by one, and then slowly fell down. Some of the slower monkeys that could not squeeze in to enjoy the delicious meal wandered around the surroundings unwillingly. When they saw Cha-Cha flying in the sky, they screamed and waved their claws as if they wanted to catch the bird in the sky. Not only Xiao Xian, even Cha-Cha, who had lowered his head to take a look, shivered. He seemed to have thought of the situation that he might encounter if he fell down. He flapped his wings vigorously, hoping to fly out of this place as soon as possible. "Don't let go, brother. If you let go, I'll die." Xiao Xian patted Cha-Cha's claws lightly. Screech! Cha-Cha responded and accelerated, flying towards the mountain range in the distance. Along the way, they encountered a few more birds. Fortunately, although the situation was dangerous, they safely flew over the thorns in the end. At dusk, the man and the bird finally landed on a tree. Both of them let out a long sigh of relief. No wonder the ancestors didn't want to get close to this severing land. Not to mention the tall, thick, and dense thorns, those monkeys could eat people quickly. Even a senior totem warrior could not fight against creatures that had a great advantage in numbers. Not to mention, this was only what Xiao Xian saw from the sky. Perhaps there were other creatures living in the thorns that had not been discovered yet. "You take a rest first. I'll be on guard." Xiao Xian patted Cha-Cha next to him and said in a low voice. Even if they passed through the thorns and came to this mountain range that looked no different from the hunting area, Xiao Xian could not let down his guard. Night came quietly. Xiao Xian couldn't find a cave nearby, so he could only find a place on top of a tree. He used the surrounding branches as camouflage, set up a small trap, and sprinkled some medicinal powder on the ground. He made do here for the night. The sounds in the forest could tell Xiao Xian if this place was the same as the hunting area. Listening carefully, the sounds made by different creatures mixed together to form a unique sound of the area. Therefore, as long as he listened to the sounds, he could make a preliminary judgment. Xiao Xian carefully distinguished these sounds. No, it was different. The nocturnal creatures here were very different from those in the hunting area. It seemed that he had to pay more attention. He could not judge based on his previous knowledge in the hunting area. Late at night, Xiao Xian was awakened by the sound of leaves rubbing against each other. Because he needed to be vigilant, he could not sleep deeply. This was a habit he had developed in the forest. He did not rest, but he could not rest at ease. He would wake up at the slightest abnormal sound. Listening carefully, the sound was like the wind blowing the branches full of dense leaves, and the leaves rustled. But in fact, at this time, there was no wind at all. None of the leaves around Xiao Xian moved. The tree trunk under his feet trembled slightly, which meant that something had climbed up the tree. It was not on Xiao Xian's branch, but it was not far away. The rustling sound gradually became louder. Xiao Xian slightly comforted Cha-Cha, who was a little uneasy. Holding the hilt of the stone knife in his right hand, he held his breath, and at the same time, he used his special vision to look outside. The branches were a little interfering, but Xiao Xian could still see through the leaves and see the situation outside. He looked in the direction of the sound. Was that a snake? Looking at its bones, it looked like a snake, but its outline was a little blurry. Its body surface was covered with many long, thin, and dense bone-like things. This was a creature that Xiao had never seen before. He could only judge the creature that had climbed up the tree based on its general shape. The snake's body was much thicker than Xiao's. It could easily swallow Xiao in one bite, which gave Xiao a bad feeling. Fortunately, it did not come to the branch where Xiao and the others were. Instead, it went through the branches to another tree. When a strange snake was far away, the rustling sound also gradually faded away. Cha-Cha's anxiety also subsided. Xiao tightened the stone knife in his hand and carefully exhaled. He did not know if this trip was worth it, but his adventurous nature from his previous life, coupled with Cha-Cha's yearning for a certain place, made Xiao decide to make a trip. Perhaps there were more dangers ahead, but once he started, he could not turn back. Xiao would also try his best to go as far as possible. Perhaps he would die and not be able to return to the tribe. There was enough food left in the tribe, and there was Caesar at Old Ku's side. His life would not be more difficult than Old Ku's former life as a stoneware craftsman. Thinking about it, Xiao sneered in his heart. Would he die? How was that possible? Holding the knife, Xiao closed his eyes and rested for a while. He had to continue tomorrow. At night, Xiao woke up several times and saw several nocturnal animals. They were indeed different from the animals in the forest on the other side of the thorny belt. In the next few days, Xiao quietly walked through the forest while Cha-Cha flew by in the air. Xiao only needed to follow Cha-Cha. It could determine the correct direction. This trip was to find the place Cha-Cha had been looking for, not to hunt. Apart from eating basic food, when they were hungry, Xiao and Cha-Cha would not do much fighting. They had to save more energy for the journey and also be vigilant of the dangers around them. Where would they find the time and energy to hunt? Since Xiao decided to bring Cha-Cha here, Cha-Cha was no longer lazy. It hunted fiercely every day, ate a lot, and hurried on with its journey. Many times, it even thought that Xiao was too slow, so it grabbed Xiao and flew up. After all, the road on the mountain was not as fast as flying. Sometimes they would meet some big flying birds. Cha-Cha would first avoid them. If it could not avoid them, it would fight them. If it could not fight them, it would run away. If it could not escape from them, it would lead them down and ask Xiao for help. Just like that, they walked for 6 days straight. At this time, the hunting group that stayed in the third location did not see Xiao, so they had to go back first. Xiao did not expect that the place Cha-Cha wanted to go would be so far away. He and Cha-Cha had been walking for more than 10 days, but it seemed that they had not seen the end. During these 10 days, Xiao and Cha-Cha almost fell into the stomach of the strange, ferocious beasts in the forest several times. Both of them had many injuries. When they were seriously injured, they would find a cave and rest for 2 days. They could not rush at this time. They had to rest well and maintain a good state so that they could continue to move forward. Sneaking in this dangerous forest made Xiao more sensitive to danger. At the same time, he became more skilled in hiding himself and his breath. Holding the scarred, teeth knife, Xiao moved his arm. His arm was broken when he dodged the saber-toothed beast, but it was not a big deal. He would feel better after a night's rest. The stone knives that he had brought with him were all broken. Xiao had made some rough stone knives on the way, but they were all broken in the fight with the ferocious beasts. Now, the only thing he had left was Old Ku's teeth knife. But, judging from the condition of the teeth knife, it would not last long. In front of them, there was a cliff about 100 meters high. Without Xiao's signal, Cha-Cha had already flown down. Xiao put the teeth knife into the animal skin bag around his waist and grabbed Cha-Cha's claw with his other, uninjured arm. Cha-Cha flew down the cliff with Xiao. In front of them, there was still a huge forest with no end in sight. But the trees in this forest seemed to be taller than the ones they had seen before. After flying for a while, Xiao asked Cha-Cha to find a place to put him down. Cha-Cha did not respond. There were no birds around, so there were no threats. They could continue to fly. It felt that it was faster to fly. All right, then fly a little higher. I keep having the feeling that this place, before Xiao Xian finished his words, a branch that stretched out from the top of a giant tree suddenly bent and then shot out like a spring toward Cha-Cha, who was about to fly over. At the moment when the branch shot out, the branches and leaves on its body quickly contracted. The leaves closed and stuck to the branch, and the branch fell down and stuck to its body like scales. It was a snake, and this strange snake reminded Xiao Xian of the creatures he had encountered on the night when he first entered this mountain. Chapter 139. Be careful, Xiao Xian hurriedly shouted. The giant snake's body shot forward like a spring. The friction between its body and the air was like a strong wind, not giving Cha-Cha enough time to react. The distance of 10 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Xiao Xian wanted to help, but they were in the air and his mobility was limited. He could only warn Cha-Cha. Unfortunately, it was too late. Cha-Cha heard Xiao Xian's words and wanted to fly higher, but something unexpected happened. He wanted to avoid it, but he was too late. The giant snake that shot forward bit Cha-Cha's wing. It was fine to fly with Xiao Xian in the air, but with the addition of the giant snake, Cha-Cha could only be dragged down. Screech Cha-Cha let out a long hiss unwillingly, and his body fell rapidly with the force. The giant snake carried Cha-Cha and landed on a tree, then fell down from the tree. Through layers of branches, they slowed down and finally landed on the ground covered in thick grass. It seemed that the giant snake was already familiar with this, as it did not worry about the danger of falling to its death. The branches that blocked its fall only slowed it down but did not hurt it at all. Its skin would give it enough protection. The giant snake bit Cha-Cha's wing, and its body quickly wrapped around Cha-Cha. Prey must be strangled to death before eating. Screech Cha-Cha wanted to break free, but found that he could not loosen the snake's grip. Every time he struggled, the snake's body would tighten. This made Cha-Cha even more uncomfortable, and he could not even make a sound. After a while, he would not even be able to breathe. Xiao Xian, who was being held by Cha-Cha, let go of Cha-Cha's claws when the giant snake coiled around him. Without thinking, he took out his teeth knife and slashed down with all his might. With a bang, the knife landed heavily on the giant snake's body. Crack, crack! The sound of a tree branch being chopped and broken reverberated through the forest. Some of the fragments on the snake's tough and thick skin were sent flying by the slash. This was the knife Xiao Xian usually used when he hunted ferocious beasts in the hunting area. If the prey's skin was tough, he would quickly follow up with another knife. Using his full strength, he slashed continuously in one breath. Moreover, every slash was aimed at the same spot at the same time. Even if the beast's skin was tough, as long as the saber was still there and the saber was still hard, he could break open a hole in this tough defense. The tree-like camouflage was the snake's specialized scales. Compared to ordinary branches, the snake's specialized scales were harder. Even Xiao Xian's teeth blade could only leave a mark on the scales. It was difficult to cut a wound in one go. Indeed, Xiao Xian had been injured before, so the strength of his slashes was weakened. He could not injure the snake with one strike. However, the snake's skin was harder to deal with than the thorn-black wind's hard thorns. It was also a huge problem for Xiao Xian. However, if one strike was not enough, he would try again. If 2 strikes were not enough, he would try again. The teeth knife kept slashing, and the hard fragments of the snake's skin were sent flying. It was very painful. Like the fragments of an explosion, they scattered in all directions. He could not stop. He could not give the beast enough time to react. What's more, Cha-Cha was still caught by the snake. Xiao Xian needed to solve this problem as soon as possible. The longer he delayed, the closer Cha-Cha would be to death. Crack, crack, crack. There were 3 crisp slashes in a row, and the fragments of the snake's hard skin splashed. Along with the slashes, the weird snake's unique roar was heard. It was like the shrill sound of a storm blowing through a narrow gap. Slash, slash, slash. Xiao Xian had no time to care about the discomfort in his eardrum. He only focused on cutting the wound on the snake's body with his teeth knife. Every time he cut, the snake's thick and solid leather armor would crack deeper. The snake sensed Xiao Xian's intention and became angry. The specialized scales, which had shrunk, grew like leaves in spring. Except for the part where Cha-Cha was curled, the specialized scales on the other parts of the snake were erected and the leaves were completely unfolded. The whole snake was like a blooming flower on a stick. Its body, which was not small in the first place, suddenly expanded to twice its original size. On the strange snake face Xiao Xian had never seen before, a pair of cold eyes stared at Xiao Xian. Its brown forked tongue, which was like a tree branch, came out of its mouth. It twisted its thick body and swung its tail at Xiao Xian mercilessly. Xiao Xian had to temporarily stop slashing. He bent his knees, and his body swayed slightly. His feet stomped heavily on the ground, and the plants under his feet instantly turned into a puddle of green mud. His figure bounced back to avoid the snake's powerful tail. After landing on the ground, he quickly jumped up and down a few times. Every time he touched the ground, his feet stomped hard, leaving deep marks on the ground. His figure was like the wind, quickly changing his position to avoid being caught by the snake. Then, without taking a breath, he swung his teeth knife and slashed at the same spot where he had slashed several times just now. Don't think that I can't see the scars on your branches just because you've bloomed. Slash. The branches and leaves that had exploded to block the opening were cut off by this slash. The blade did not stop and accurately chopped at the opening left by the previous slashes. It was another round of continuous slashes, not giving the snake any time to breathe. Even if the teeth knife was not sharp enough, it still posed a great threat to the snake this time. Poochie. Strange brownish-green blood spurted out from the wound. Even if it had a tough outer armor, the pain of flesh wounds and bleeding could not be avoided, even for a ferocious beast. After all, it was not a body of steel. The thick, tough leather armor had already been damaged, and the wound was still deepening. If the snake did not stop it, it would be directly cut in half. Feeling the pain on its body, the snake was angry and screamed again and again. Its original target was the eagle that flew past. It liked to eat this kind of small eagle the most. As for the creature caught by the eagle, it thought that it was prey caught by the eagle and did not take it seriously at all. It could not understand why this seemingly weak creature in front of it could pose such a threat to it. Its skin was broken and blood was flowing out. This was something that it had never expected. If it could, it would have thrown this seemingly weak creature far away when it caught the eagle. Unfortunately, regret was useless. The serpent twisted its body. It was dodging to avoid being attacked again in its wounds. However, Xiao Xian's figure was agile. Not only did he avoid its attack, but he also pressed on. Slash again. Again. The blade flashed continuously. The wound on the snake's body became bigger and bigger, and more brownish-green blood flowed out. In the end, the snake chose to give up on the prey in its hands. It retracted its branches and leaves, threw the eagle down, and dragged its injured body away quickly. From the moment the snake dragged Cha-Cha to the moment it was forced back by Xiao Xian, it had only been a minute. Xiao Xian was anxious about Cha-Cha's injury and did not give the snake any time to breathe. This was why he was able to finish it in such a short time. On the other hand, Xiao Xian exploded with more power than usual in a short time. Looking at the snake's escaping figure, Xiao Xian panted and did not chase after it. After the snake threw Cha-Cha down, he quickly ran over to check on Cha-Cha's injuries. Cha-Cha's wings were injured, and there were some fractures. It could only flap weakly a few times and would not be able to fly for a while. Looking at the places where Cha-Cha had been bitten by the snake, there were no traces of venomous fangs, and the wounds did not seem to be highly toxic. Xiao Xian breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, there was no poison. After solving the problem just now, Xiao Xian thought to find a safe place to hide with Cha-Cha to recuperate. When the man and eagle recovered, they would fly over in the air. This place was probably much safer in the air. Of course, they had to fly high. They could not give these strange snakes a chance. The snake just now was not the one Xiao Xian encountered that night. Therefore, there were many snakes like this in this forest. No wonder they did not see any other birds in the sky when they flew over. They probably all entered the stomach of these strange snakes. As he was thinking, Xiao Xian's movements became sluggish. Even Cha-Cha, who was flapping its wings in frustration, stopped. Hiss, 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 hiss. Above his head, that familiar sound was heard again. Cold sweat dripped from Xiao Xian's forehead. All the muscles in his body were tense. In that short minute just now, Xiao Xian had almost exhausted all his strength. He was still in a state of exhaustion. Before coming over, he had already gone through a battle and injured his arm. Just now, he had gone through another battle. He thought that he would have a buffer, but he did not expect that this forest would not give him enough time to catch his breath. Xiao Xian turned around, his back facing Cha-Cha. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the sound. In the forest of giant trees, looking up from the ground, the lush branches and leaves were all that could be seen, covering the sky and the sun. It was as if the little bits of sunlight that seeped through her charity. As for the place where the giant snake had dragged Cha-Cha down, because of the broken branches along the way, more yang guang leaked down. Combined with the surrounding environment, it was like an abrupt light pillar, extremely eye-catching. At this moment, Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha were standing in this light pillar. The yang guang illuminated this place, making it much warmer than other places in the forest. If it was in the tribe, being exposed to this kind of yang guang would not be enjoyable. When it was peaceful and warm, it would almost make people close their eyes in comfort. However, at this moment, whether it was Xiao Xian or Cha-Cha, they could not feel this kind of warmth. On the contrary, they only felt that they were in the coldest winter snow. In the distance, in the dark forest, there were no other living creatures, not even flying insects. Above them, two thick branches became bent and then slid down along the trunk. Bang! A slight and short muffled sound, the same as the one Xiao Xian heard in the air. The two giant snakes had already put away the specialized scales that were used as camouflage. They slowly moved towards Xiao Xian, as if they were not worried that their prey would escape. With one in front and one behind, Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha were sandwiched in the middle. Thump, 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 thump. Xiao Xian listened to his thundering heartbeat, his palms sweating. His grip on the stone knife did not tremble. Xiao Xian's mind raced as he tried to think of a solution. He knew that he did not have much strength left. If he had to fight one more time, he would not have much chance of winning. Even if he risked his life to fight one more time, there would still be some hope. However, there were now two of them, and these two were not smaller than the one he had just cut off. Chapter 140. Even without their specialized scales, the two snakes were still much thicker than Xiao Xian. They slowly approached Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha. Strangely, Xiao Xian saw a trace of mockery in their cold eyes. They had seen Xiao Xian defeat their own kind, but did not help. Instead, they watched from high up on the branches, as if they were using their own kind to test Xiao Xian's strength. Now, they realized that Xiao Xian did not have enough strength to pose a threat to them. Beside him was a delicious little eagle. Finally, they slowly came down from the tree. The two snakes twisted their bodies and walked in an S shape, getting closer and closer. Just as Xiao Xian was thinking about whether to fight one more time or carry Cha-Cha and escape, a sharp eagle cry came from the sky. This cry broke the silence of the forest and also disturbed the originally slow pace of the two snakes. The two snakes flicked their tongues as if sensing something. However, they did not approach Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha. Xiao Xian's heart beat faster. There were eagles. Eagles and snakes were also on opposite sides here. Either you eat me, or I swallow you. Naturally, the two snakes would not be small characters like him and Cha-Cha if they were able to make them wary. Weak creatures would not be able to survive in this forest. Cha-Cha turned its head and looked away from the two snakes to the sky. Whoosh! A huge figure flashed past above them. The two snakes seemed to have the intention to leave, but were hesitating. Just as they were hesitating, the huge figure flew over again. This time, it did not just fly past them, but directly passed through the dense branches above them. Two large claws tore through the dense branches, revealing an eagle head similar to Cha-Cha's. Is this also a giant mountain eagle? Xiao Xian thought. Compared to the giant mountain eagle, Cha-Cha looked like a toddler in kindergarten. The giant eagle's sharp eyes looked at the two snakes on the ground and swooped down. Crack, 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 crack. The branches above them became brittle and broke into countless pieces. Wooden splinters fell like rain. Xiao Xian carried Cha-Cha and quickly ran to the side to hide. He did not dare to run away. Here, he could rely on the giant eagle to avoid the two snakes. If he ran away, there might be more of these snakes in other places. It was better to stay here and observe the situation. The giant eagle swooped down through the branches. When its large claws clawed on the tree trunks, 10 people would not be able to encircle them, leaving holes. When it was a few meters above the ground, the eagle claw exerted force and rushed toward one of the large snakes. The area under the forest was still a little narrow for it. It couldn't even stretch its wings, and its agility was greatly reduced. Even so, the eagle's claws still caused a great impact to the snake. The eagle's claws pressed down on the snake's wriggling body. The eagle's sharp beak pecked at the snake like a sharp blade. The other snake wanted to help, but the eagle whipped its wing and only bit off a few feathers. The eagle was supposed to hunt in a wide area, not in a dense forest. If it did not do well, it would be trapped. Moreover, the eagle's wings could be scratched by the branches. Even if the eagle's wings were tougher than those of ordinary birds, it was not completely unaffected. Xiao Xian did not dare to help rashly. If Xiao Xian went over, the giant eagle would be restrained. The giant eagle grabbed the big snake that had been pecked by it and flung it towards the thick tree trunk next to it with great force. At the same time, when the other snake tried to bite it, it used the snake under its claws as a whip and lashed at it. Bang! The snake's head hit the tree trunk again and again. Every time it hit the tree trunk, it would leave a hole. Xiao Xian watched from the side with his mouth wide open. This eagle was indeed an expert. Looking at the way it used the snake's body as a whip, it was obvious that it was not its first time. It was very skilled. It was the first time he saw an eagle use a snake as a whip. It seemed that this giant eagle understood where its weakness was and used a more relaxed method to deal with its prey. Cha-Cha, who was next to Xiao Xian, was also stunned. However, it soon became excited and wanted to grab the snake and swing it a few times. Finally, the snake under the eagle's claws was knocked dizzy. It did not have a chance to bite the eagle's claws before it was torn apart by the eagle's beak. The thick and solid skin had already been broken in several places. Brownish-green blood flowed everywhere. Every time the eagle's beak tore the snake's skin, a piece of skin and flesh would fall off. The other snake wanted to escape, but the giant eagle dropped the snake under its claws and grabbed at the escaping snake. In the end, neither of the snakes managed to escape. The giant eagle bit and tore the two snakes, then raised its claws and threw one of them toward Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha. It grabbed the other snake and flapped its wings. It seemed that it wanted to leave this place and find a place to eat. The snake that was thrown over was obviously the giant eagle's charity. However, how could Xiao Xian give up the opportunity to leave this place for a snake? Xiao Xian stored his teeth knife back at his waist and ran over with Cha-Cha. He could see that the giant eagle did not want to kill Cha-Cha, but Xiao Xian still had to be cautious. After running a few steps, he slowed down and observed the eagle's reaction. The giant eagle, which was about to fly away, stopped and looked at Xiao Xian. Its sharp eyes made Xiao Xian break out in a cold sweat and feel great pressure. Cha-Cha, who was being carried on Xiao Xian's shoulder, was also doing his best at this time. He cried pitifully at the giant eagle, which was worthy of his usual cleverness and cheekiness. The giant eagle stared at Xiao Xian, who was getting closer and closer. It seemed to be thinking about something, and its sharp eyes were much less sharp. It flapped its wings, and its claws vigorously pushed off the ground and flew up. Xiao Xian grabbed Cha-Cha's leg with one hand and jumped over. His legs clamped down on the snake's body, which had been pecked until only its spine was left. This was the only place that could be clamped down. As the giant eagle flew up, Xiao Xian clamped down on the snake's body and hung upside down. Brownish-green blood flowed all over Xiao Xian's body. Cha-Cha, who was being held by Xiao Xian, did not feel good either. It was rarely held upside down like this. Thanks to his strong body and the strength of a totem warrior in the tribe, Xiao Xian could carry Cha-Cha's weight with one arm. It was not difficult for him to carry big stones in the tribe. Although Cha-Cha was big now, it was much lighter than a stone. During the ascent, the giant eagle could not fly freely, so it had to use the trees nearby several times. Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha bumped into trees several times. He also felt the same as the snake just now. Xiao Xian tried his best not to throw Cha-Cha away. They did not expect to be able to sit on the eagle's back and get a ride. This eagle had a good temper. It was not related to Cha-Cha by blood, so it did not show any affection. It was just a little friendly. Xiao Xian could not push it anymore. If he angered it, he and Cha-Cha might end up in the eagle's mouth. In a world of ferocious beasts, the same kind was nothing. They could still be eaten. After rushing out of the forest, it was much easier. Xiao Xian felt that even his breathing became easier. The giant eagle flew higher and higher, far away from the top of the forest. This was an experienced giant eagle, unlike Cha-Cha, who was a rookie. The scenery on the ground became smaller and smaller. Xiao Xian's field of vision also became wider. He could see the mountains in the distance and the green forest. Xiao Xian, who was brought high up in the sky, finally had time to observe the giant eagle. Xiao Xian did not notice it before, but now that he observed it carefully, he found that the giant eagle's condition was not as good as he had imagined. There were some fragments on its claws that were about to fall off. The toes on its claws were also broken in 2 places and were bleeding. This was caused by the fight with the 2 snakes just now. Looking at its flying posture, it was not as fast as before. The flapping of its wings was also a little clumsy, as if it was withstanding a great weight. In fact, Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha were nothing compared to this giant eagle. As for the snake, even if it was caught, it should not have been so heavy. This giant eagle seemed to be struggling to fly. Xiao Xian observed the giant eagle from its claws, to its feathers, to its beak. Because Xiao Xian often faced Cha-Cha, when he looked at this giant eagle that looked similar to Cha-Cha, he found that its beak was more curved than Cha-Cha's. This kind of beak was not good for pecking prey. Was it sick? Or was there another reason? It seemed to have a sharp aura, but its body was no longer sharp. A fight could bring it great pain. It was hard to imagine that such a powerful eagle in the forest would be in such a state. If he had not observed this, Xiao Xian would have thought that it was still healthy. As he pondered, Xiao Xian suddenly thought of a possibility. Could it be that this eagle was already old? He just did not know how old it was. How long would it take for Cha-Cha to grow to this size? A few decades? A few hundred years? Or even longer? The mountain range was getting closer and closer. Xiao Xian had never been here before. Moreover, the giant eagle was flying in the direction that Cha-Cha had flown to. Could it be that Eagle Mountain was over there? However, Xiao Xian did not see any other giant eagles here. If it was Eagle Mountain, why was there no eagle? It seemed that Eagle Mountain was not here, but somewhere even further away. Xiao Xian thought to himself, this place was only a temporary resting place for the giant eagle. As it approached the mountain, the giant eagle began to flap its wings vigorously to pull itself up. This time, the feeling of heaviness was even more obvious. Even if Cha-Cha was carrying Xiao Xian, it would not be so heavy. The giant eagle finally landed on the edge of a cliff, and the strange snake was thrown to the ground. Xiao Xian also jumped down from the strange snake and carried Cha-Cha to the side. Xiao Xian did not touch the snake. It was the giant eagle's prey. Most fearsome beasts had a strong sense of monopolization over their prey, and would fight to the death with anyone who tried to snatch it. Cha-Cha also did not go over, and quietly stayed at the side with Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian touched the animal skin bag on his body. There were 2 small pieces of jerky, and they were a little hard. He gave one to Cha-Cha and ate the other one himself. Cha-Cha looked at the jerky in Xiao Xian's hand and was a little hesitant. It did not like this kind of meat. However, in this place it had no choice. It could only recover after eating something. Bang! A piece of bloody snake meat was thrown in front of Cha-Cha. Cha-Cha looked at the giant eagle that was still pecking at its food, and then looked at the fresh snake meat in front of it. It did not eat Xiao Xian's jerky. Xiao Xian retracted his hand and gnawed on the jerky while thinking. This giant eagle had a good heart. We're all old people like this. Chapter 141. After staying at the edge of the cliff for 2 days, Xiao Xian's body had almost recovered, and the injury on his arm had also recovered. However, Cha-Cha's recovery ability was not as strong as Xiao Xian's, so it took him more than 10 days to recover. What surprised Xiao Xian the most was that the giant eagle had also stayed at the cliff for 10 days. It did not have a nest here, and it was just a passerby. Every day, after eating its fill, it would stand on a high rock and rest. It had no intention of leaving immediately, and every day, it would share some of the prey with Cha-Cha. In these 10 days, Cha-Cha's tiredness was dispelled, and its mental state was greatly improved. These days, it did not have to worry about food at all. It just focused on recovering. Xiao Xian went down the mountain to hunt. Without Cha-Cha's help, it would be troublesome to go down the mountain. The giant eagle would not give Xiao Xian a ride. In addition to food, Xiao Xian also found some herbs and applied them on Cha-Cha's wounds. Originally, he wanted to see if the giant eagle needed help, but seeing that it was very resistant, Xiao Xian temporarily gave up the idea. When Cha-Cha could fly again, the giant eagle did not plan to stay. The giant eagle was going to take Cha-Cha in that direction. Xiao Xian did not know if he should follow, stay, or go back directly. With this giant eagle, Cha-Cha should be a lot safer. However, after Cha-Cha flew, it called out to Xiao Xian, indicating that Xiao Xian should hurry up and follow. Xiao Xian smiled. Forget it. He would continue to follow. It would be nice to see the legendary Eagle Mountain. He put back the teeth knife in his hand and ran for a while. Then he jumped and caught Cha-Cha's eagle claw flying towards him. The giant eagle in the sky seemed to be very impatient. It circled in the sky and called out a few times, urging them to hurry up. Let's go, Xiao Xian said. Swoosh! With a carefree cry, Cha-Cha flapped its wings and chased after the giant eagle. This time, Cha-Cha had learned his lesson. He did not get too close to the trees in the forest. He maintained a certain distance, afraid that he would be attacked again. The flying posture of the giant eagle seemed to be more difficult than it was 10 days ago. The heaviness was more obvious, but even so, it was still fast enough for Cha-Cha and Xiao Xian. Cha-Cha could barely keep up. They would fly during the day and find a place to settle down at night. Before they settled down, they would grab some food and bring it to a high cliff to eat quietly. There was no lack of mountains in this area. Sometimes, they would meet other creatures living in the mountains. Most of the time, it was the giant eagle that was fighting, while Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha were cheering it on. They would be a hindrance if they went there. Every time the giant eagle fought with other ferocious beasts, Xiao Xian noticed that the injuries on its body increased. The condition of its claws, beak, and feathers was worse than when he first saw it. Only its pair of eagle eyes were so sharp that he couldn't look directly at it. With such a giant eagle as their escort, the birds along the way did not dare to provoke them, which saved them a lot of trouble. It had been nearly 30 days since they left the third hunting base, but they still had not seen their destination. However, Xiao Xian could see the changes in Cha-Cha and the giant eagle's attitude from their behavior. They were excited, and their eyes were eager. Even the giant eagle, who looked like an elder, could not wait. They were almost at their destination. On this day, the two eagles, one big and one small, continued their journey. Xiao Xian looked at the surrounding scenery. In front of them, there was a long, dragon-like mountain range. This mountain range was very high, which reminded Xiao Xian of the second hunting base. Most of the birds were blocked by the mountain range. Every time they encountered such a mountain range, they would see a different scenery after climbing over it. The peak of the mountain range was covered by clouds, and they could not see the top. They could only see a large area of snow under the clouds. The giant eagle began to climb up, and Cha-Cha followed closely. They want to climb over the mountain. Along the way, they had climbed over many mountains, but this time, the challenge was even greater. The higher they went, the more difficult it was. It seemed that there was a force that pushed back any creature that flew up. After flying for a while, Cha-Cha was obviously tired, and it rested on a protruding rock. Cha-Cha, follow it and fly up. I will stop here. Xiao Xian touched the feathers on Cha-Cha's head and said, Caw. Cha-Cha dodged Xiao Xian's hand, flapped its wings, and used its claws to grab the rock next to it. Are you being stubborn again? I will wait here. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian asked again, will you come back? Cha-Cha answered and continued to grab the rock. That's good, but it will take too long, so I will go back by myself. Xiao Xian planned to train in this area. There were many species here that Xiao Xian was unfamiliar with. Perhaps he could find some rare and precious herbs that were recorded in ancient scrolls. He always stayed in the tribe, and every time he went out, he would only take the same route. After a long time, he was tired. This time, it was a good opportunity to see this unfamiliar place. He wanted to see the so-called Eagle Mountain, but Cha-Cha was still too small. It was normal for it to travel, but this place was different. It was difficult for it to fly on its own, not to mention carrying a person. The giant eagle above them began to urge them again. Cha-Cha was still a little hesitant, so it called out to the eagle above, hurry up and follow it. It was rare for him to ride on such a big leg. If he lost it, where would he find it again? Xiao Xian was talking when he suddenly felt a wind behind his head. He turned his head and saw a giant eagle claw coming at him. Because the claw did not have any killing intent, Xiao Xian did not pull out his teeth knife. Standing on the ground, the eagle was almost 10 meters tall, so its claws were naturally much bigger than Cha-Cha's. It could even catch a big snake, so it was easy for it to catch Xiao Xian. After the giant eagle caught Xiao Xian, it flew up. Cha-Cha looked at it and quickly followed. The giant eagle's claws were obviously used to catching prey, so it could not control its strength. Xiao Xian was caught by the eagle's claws. He felt that his internal organs were about to be squeezed out and his bones were cracking. If it were not for the strong body of a totem warrior, an ordinary person would have been crushed to death. However, the giant eagle had good intentions. After spending some time together, the giant eagle did not dislike Xiao Xian as much as before. Seeing that Cha-Cha was having a hard time carrying Xiao Xian, it decided to help. However, it did not know that there were many creatures that were much weaker than the prey it usually caught. Without Xiao Xian, Cha-Cha felt a lot more relaxed, but he still couldn't fly fast. The pressure coming from the front seemed to be an invisible big hand, pressing down harder every time he rose a little. Not only Cha-Cha, but also the giant eagle. Xiao Xian's weight was nothing to the giant eagle. It was just resisting the pressure from above. The mountains in front of them were already covered in snow. There was no greenery, but they still could not see the top. Looking up, they could only see layers of clouds. The cold air poured into his lungs. At first, Xiao Xian could still withstand it. It was similar to the winter in the tribe. However, as he continued to climb, Xiao Xian found that even a totem warrior could not withstand the cold. The fur on his animal skin coat was already covered in frost, and the area of ice was expanding. Not only the animal skin coat, Xiao Xian's hair, the giant eagle's and Cha-Cha's feathers were also freezing. There was light above, but the golden Yangguang did not let people feel much warmth at this time. If it was at night, it would probably be even colder. They had to quickly climb over before it got dark. Mobilizing the totem power in his body, a warm current flowed around his body, warming up his almost frozen body. However, once it stopped, he would feel the biting cold again. When Xiao Xian felt that he was about to freeze into a popsicle, he finally saw the top of the mountain. This made Xiao Xian, who was about to turn into a popsicle, and Cha-Cha, who was already exhausted, happy. Cha-Cha flapped its wings more vigorously. Closer, even closer, slowly climbing up over the cloud-shrouded mountain peak. Xiao Xian's pupils shrank as he looked at the scene in front of him. He thought that after reaching the top, he would descend and go to the other side of the mountain. However, when he reached the top, he found that there was only flat ground. Bang! The giant eagle landed on the ice field at the top of the mountain. Xiao Xian, who was thrown away, rolled a few times on the frozen ground before stopping. There was a thick layer of snow on the ground, but the snow was very hard, like stone. Looking behind him, there was a layer of clouds. It was as if he had stepped on the clouds and entered the realm of heaven. However, looking ahead, there were clouds and mist, and he could not see clearly what was in front of him. However, Xiao Xian could feel that there were other living creatures in the lingering clouds and mist. After the giant eagle released Xiao Xian, it panted for a while and then walked forward. Cha-Cha quickly followed. The cold mist filled the air, and Xiao Xian walked beside them. When he turned his head, he could only see a layer of mist. The place where he had landed had disappeared into the mist. On the surrounding ground, there were some protruding, crystal-like icicles. One could be seen every few dozen meters. Kacha! Kacha kacha! Xiao Xian looked around. There were similar sounds coming from all directions. Some were near, some were far. However, Xiao Xian did not dare to be distracted. He and Cha-Cha followed closely beside the giant eagle. Tap, tap, footsteps came from behind. It was the eagle's footsteps. A flow of cold air came from behind, and Xiao Xian shuddered. As the footsteps came closer, Xiao Xian turned his head to look. What he saw shocked Xiao Xian so much that he stopped breathing. Because of the mist, Xiao Xian could not see clearly. He could only see a huge black figure in the mist. If Cha-Cha was like a kindergarten kid next to the giant eagle, then the giant eagle was also like a child next to this big guy next to it. Was this also a giant mountain eagle? Xiao Xian used his special vision to look. Although it was still blocked by the mist, he could vaguely make out the skeleton of a giant mountain eagle. He took a deep breath. Xiao Xian suddenly felt that his vision was too narrow. A giant mountain eagle, with the word giant attached to its name, could be seen from its size. The one they had seen before was not a typical example of this species. He just did not know if there were more giant eagles. Among these big guys, Xiao Xian felt waves of pressure. It was as if he had fallen into a nest of monsters. Looking at the two eagles, one big and one small, in front of him, Xiao Xian hurriedly followed. No matter what, following them closely was the best thing to do. The big eagle led Cha-Cha to walk in the misty land. When they came to a protruding, crystal-like icicle, the big eagle lowered its head and bit the icicle. It pecked off a piece of the icicle, bit it, swallowed it, and then continued. Cha-Cha looked at it and pecked at the ice as well. Hearing the cracking sounds, Xiao Xian finally understood where the sounds came from. Chapter 142. Xiao Xian thought they would pass through here, but to his surprise, they found a place and stopped. When they were hungry, they gnawed on the icicles next to them, and then continued standing there, as if they were waiting for something. The energy contained in the crystal-like icicles was not as pure as that of the fire crystals, and the energy stored in them was far less than that of the fire crystals. However, these icicles were the food that kept the giant mountain eagles alive. Xiao Xian pried a piece off with his teeth knife and tried to bite it. It was too hard and barely edible. However, compared to the giant eagles, Xiao Xian could only scrape off a little bit. Although the icicles were cold, and Xiao Xian's hairs shivered when he bit them, the energy he gained from the icicles enabled Xiao Xian to operate his totemic power for a longer period of time. That was why he did not freeze to death. It was no wonder that Cha-Cha was not afraid of the cold at all, even when it was winter in the tribe. Compared to the extreme cold here, the winter in the tribe was too warm for the giant mountain eagles. In the following days, Xiao Xian saw many more giant mountain eagles, except for the giant figure he saw when he first arrived on the frozen plateau. Some were as big as the eagle that brought them here, and some were several times bigger than the one that shocked Xiao Xian on the first day. Was this the mountain the giant mountain eagle mentioned? Was this the Eagle Mountain? Xiao Xian guessed. These giant mountain eagles came here as if they were going to the market, but they were not in a hurry to leave. None of them fought with each other, and they all waited here obediently. Even Cha-Cha, who was usually very energetic, became unusually well-behaved. Every day, he stayed close to the giant mountain eagle that brought them here. Ever since it hatched, it was the first time it came to such a place. Being able to find this place and having a strong sense of longing was completely due to the nature of its bloodline. Days passed, and Xiao Xian did the same thing every day. When he was hungry, he would eat some ice like the giant mountain eagles. Then he would sit quietly beside the two eagles, one big and one small, and operate his totemic power to resist the cold. At first, Xiao Xian's teeth were chattering. The animal skin coat he wore was not thick enough to keep him warm. Xiao Xian's face was pale, and his breathing was slow. At night, he shivered all over and could not sleep. He felt like he was about to become one with the icicles. All he could do was operate his totemic power over and over again. Cha-Cha was not much better than Xiao Xian. It was the first time it's faced in such a harsh environment, and it's not fully adapted or mentally prepared. In contrast, the big eagle beside him and the other giant mountain eagles around him were like old monks in meditation, as if they could not feel the cold. They were already used to it. At first, Cha-Cha wanted to squeeze under the giant eagle's wing to get some warmth, but it was mercilessly pushed aside. It could only stay close to Xiao Xian. They were in the same boat, shivering in the cold fog. Gradually, Xiao Xian began to adapt. Even when he was sleeping, his totemic power would operate on its own, tirelessly warming up his almost frozen body again and again. Cha-Cha was worthy of being a giant mountain eagle. Even if it was not used to it first, it was getting a lot better these days. Xiao Xian used his teeth knife to carve a mark on an icicle next to him, to record the number of days that had passed. During this process, Xiao Xian found that these icicles could actually grow on their own. The mark that was carved 20 days ago had risen a little after 20 days, and the icicles had also become thicker. The bite and gouge marks made by the two eagles and Xiao Xian were gradually becoming shallower. No wonder those giant eagles could still see so many icicles on the ground. They could grow on their own. What a strange place. Ta, 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 ta. The sound of footsteps came. It sounded like a giant eagle, but its footsteps were slightly heavy. As the footsteps came closer, the effect of the fog became a lot fainter. The tall figure walked past Xiao Xian, which allowed Xiao Xian to see its body clearly. However, he could only see its claws clearly. Above that, the fog still blurred his vision. He could not see the upper part of its body clearly. This should be a very old eagle. Perhaps it used to be an overlord. It had challenged the threats of nature countless times, and had been provoked by its own kind and other beasts. It had once ruled the sky and soared in the sky, but now it was old. Its sharp claws had become blunt, and there were many fragments on its toes, as if they were about to fall off. Its feathers had become sparse, and there were many wounds on its legs, big and small, of different depths. This situation was very similar to the giant eagle that brought them here. The giant figure walked past them at a close distance. Its claws could easily cover Cha-Cha under its feet. When it walked past, its wings shook, making Xiao Xian feel that the sky above his head was dark for a moment, completely blocking out the light. Cha-Cha and the giant eagle raised their heads to take a look. Then, they withdrew their gazes and continued to be in a daze, perhaps deep in thought. The giant figure gradually walked away until it completely disappeared in the fog. 20 days, 30 days. On the 40th day, the surrounding giant mountain eagles were no longer silent. They began to become active. Sometimes they would call out a few times, and there would be a series of echoes from other places. These days, more and more mountain eagles came to the ice field. Every day, Xiao Xian could see figures of different sizes passing by. There was a small eagle about the same size as Cha-Cha. It probably came with its parents. It walked next to the two giant figures. When it saw Xiao Xian, it curiously approached him, but was called back by its parents. The fog was thinning. Yang Guang passed through the fog and gradually became clear. On this day, when the sun rose and shone on the high ice field, Xiao Xian found that the fog around him had completely dispersed. Around him, there were many figures of different sizes. The small ones were about the same size as Cha-Cha, and the big ones were as big as mountains. One by one, they completely blocked Xiao Xian's vision. Xiao Xian was among them. He was like an outsider who had intruded into this huge group. He was so small that the giant eagles did not even bother to look at him. Xiao Xian did not know where so many giant beasts had been active. He had lived in the tribe for several years. He had followed the hunting team out to hunt, and even followed the advance group to find Cha-Cha's Greenland. But he had never seen so many giant eagles. They were not exactly the same. Some had different patterns and colors, but they all looked the same. They belonged to the giant mountain eagle species. Perhaps they came from all over the continent, or perhaps they had gathered in one place. But no matter where they came from, they were all gathered here at this moment. Jiao, Jiao! The eagle's cries seemed to come from far away. It sounded like there was more than one eagle. It sounded like a group. It resonated with the echoes. The group of eagles cried together. The sound was getting closer and closer. Whoosh! A huge figure flew into the air, flying over the many giant mountain eagles standing on the ice field. It had a sharp beak, sharp claws, powerful wings, and a proud figure. Its entire body exuded a sense of freedom, and it was bold and unrestrained as it soared. This figure covered a large part of the sky above Xiao Xian's head. The originally clear golden Yangguang was completely blocked. This was only the beginning. Behind it, there was 108 group of giant mountain eagles followed closely. They also flapped their powerful wings. They were light and swift, unruly and heroic. Their flying movements exuded a sense of obvious excitement and pleasure. Compared to the old, weak, sick, and disabled standing on the ice field at this moment, they were like strong and healthy experts, full of vitality. It was not only the sky above Xiao Xian's head. In the distance, where Xiao Xian peeked through the gaps between the big figures around him, there were also many figures flying past. They came from the front, then returned to the other side of the mountain. Xiao Xian felt as if he was about to be blown away by the wind created by the eagles. When these figures gradually disappeared, there was already movement in front of him. The sound of wings flapping could be heard. At first it was sparse, but then a group of wings flapping could be heard. Xiao Xian saw the giant eagles in front of him also flapping their wings and flying up. Beside him, 2 eagle cries could be heard. Xiao Xian looked over. Cha-Cha also flew up. It called out to Xiao Xian, then flew forward with the rest of the group. When these big fellows that blocked Xiao Xian's vision flew up, what appeared in front of Xiao Xian was a snow-covered mountain. The mountain was a little far away, but it was very big. He did not know where the top was. Xiao Xian had thought that this mountain was high enough, but he found that there was another mountain higher than the one before. Under the golden Yangguang, the snow-white mountain in the distance emitted a halo like holy light. It was aloof and independent. Standing on the ice field, Xiao Xian quietly looked at the huge, snowy mountain in the distance, feeling the throbbing in his soul. Under such circumstances, he suddenly felt like he was on a pilgrimage. Thousands of eagles flew together towards the snow-white mountain. What was ahead? Xiao Xian also walked in that direction. His footsteps became faster and faster, and his legs that had not moved for a long time gradually became more flexible. In the end, he directly ran. Cha-Cha and the giant eagles' figures quickly merged into the group of eagles. There were too many of them, and it was impossible to tell which was which. Xiao Xian followed the group of eagles forward. Then he saw the giant eagles fly up one by one and fall down, disappearing from the edge of the ice field. The ice field was at the edge, but in front of it was a bottomless abyss. The group of eagles flew down from the top of the ice field into the abyss. Although they were flying down, they were still heading towards the snowy mountain. The snow-white mountain in the distance, whose bottom could not be seen and whose top could not be seen, stood there proudly. This was the Eagle Mountain. This time, Xiao Xian was very sure. Xiao Xian stood at the edge, watching the group of eagles disappear into the abyss. After an unknown period of time, the fog that had dispersed began to gather again. The gathering fog blocked Xiao Xian's vision. Everything returned to the previous situation. Chapter 143. Xiao Xian was the only one left on the vast ice field. It was very quiet all around. Although the surroundings were usually covered in fog, and he couldn't see far, from time to time he could still hear the cries of eagles of different sizes, or the sounds of giant beasts walking back and forth, or the sounds of them gnawing on the icicles. But now, the sounds that he had heard every day in the past had all disappeared. Xiao Xian had a feeling of isolation. However, even without those giant eagles, he still wanted to take a good look at the ice field. After coming here, he didn't dare to wander around because of the giant eagles. Now that the eagles had flown away, he didn't have to worry about them. Even if his vision was limited, he had already memorized the rough terrain within his field of vision while the fog was dispersing. As long as he was careful, there shouldn't be any problems. Xiao Xian walked on the ice field at the top of the mountain. Because of his usual habit, he walked very quietly, and now that the surroundings were very quiet, Xiao Xian subconsciously slowed down his movements. Although he was cautious, his speed wasn't slow. In front of him was the abyss of the cliff where the eagles flew down. Xiao Xian naturally didn't walk forward, but instead walked horizontally along the ice field. In order to avoid accidentally falling into the abyss, Xiao Xian kept a distance from the edge. He already had an idea of the length of the abyss, but he didn't know how far it was horizontally. Even when the fog was dispersing, Xiao Xian still couldn't see the edge. There were some large footprints on the ice field, and the icicles were full of pecking marks. Some of the marks were large, some small. Along the way, Xiao Xian saw a few gigantic icicles. These gigantic icicles would naturally attract the attention of the larger giant eagles. Just look at the marks on the icicles. Most of the pecking marks were on top of the icicles, and it was hard to see further up. Closer to the ground, there were only a few small pecking marks or no pecking marks. The giant eagles wouldn't always lower their heads to bite. Xiao Xian was walking when he suddenly heard a hissing sound. It wasn't loud, but because the surroundings were too quiet, the sound was more obvious. This wasn't the sound of the giant eagles walking. When the giant eagles walked here, most of them had a heavy feeling and were very generous, not avoiding anything. But at this moment, this sound made Xiao Xian feel a sense of caution. The sound was getting closer and closer. Xiao Xian hid behind a huge icicle, carefully paying attention to the creatures in the fog that were getting closer and closer. Gradually, Xiao Xian saw a long figure in the fog. Snake? No, it wasn't a snake. It was not as long as a snake, and the way it moved was different from a snake. It looked more like a worm. Stone worm? Stone worms were commonly seen in mountainous and rocky areas. But soon, Xiao Xian knew that he was wrong. This wasn't a stone worm, but a fleshy worm that was very similar to a butterfly's larva. This worm was thicker than Xiao Xian's thigh. It was nearly 4 meters long and snow-white. It had a round head and a constricted neck between its head and body. It didn't look any different from other butterfly larvae except for its larger size. But if one looked closely, they would find many differences. Many butterfly larvae that Xiao Xian had seen in hunting grounds had 3 pairs of thoracic feet, 4 pairs of abdominal feet, and 1 pair of tail feet. But the one in front of him had 3 pairs of thoracic feet, 3 pairs of abdominal feet, and 3 pairs of tail feet. The thoracic feet and tail feet were very similar, but the abdominal feet were different. The thoracic feet and tail feet had hooks at the front, while the abdominal feet had suction cups. The hissing sound that Xiao Xian heard just now was the sound of it crawling on the ice field. It was a very strange worm. Xiao Xian didn't expect to see such a creature in such a cold place. Generally speaking, they should live in warmer areas. Xiao Xian didn't know if this worm had any attack power. He just stood quietly behind the icicle, observing the snow-white worm that was crawling closer and closer. It crawled for a while, then stopped. Then it used its abdomen and tail feet to prop itself up, as if it was trying to identify something. Then it determined a direction and continued crawling. At this time, it was heading in Xiao Xian's direction. Was he discovered? Xiao Xian was vigilant, his hand silently reaching for the hilt of his sword. But the worm stopped in front of the icicle, and then Xiao Xian heard a small crunching sound. Feeling the vibration from the icicle, Xiao Xian knew that the worm was gnawing on the icicle. Its target was only the icicle, and it didn't notice Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian and the worm, one was on one side of the icicle, the other was on the other side. Xiao Xian didn't stick his head out to observe. He just relied on his hearing and the vibration from the icicle behind him to judge the worm's general behavior. The crunching sound lasted for about 2 hours. The worm changed its location and went to look for other icicles. Xiao Xian quietly followed, sometimes without the icicle's cover. As long as Xiao Xian was careful, the worm wouldn't notice Xiao Xian. In its eyes, it didn't seem to care about anything else. It was only focused on looking for food. Xiao Xian found that the worm chose the thick icicles. Because the thick icicles were mostly long, the larger giant eagles gnawed on them. Most of them were gnawed on the top of the icicles, and the ones near the ground were rarely gnawed. And the worm's target was the thick icicles near the ground, where the giant eagles didn't gnaw on them. Was it a neat freak, or was it afraid of the smell left behind by the giant eagles? Xiao Xian didn't know. However, after figuring out its preferences, Xiao Xian became more skillful when following it. Looking at the traces left by the worm on the icicles, Xiao Xian found that the worm ate much faster than he did. Its bite force didn't lose out to the giant eagles. It was just that each bite was very small, and it ate quickly, so the crunching sound were very dense. When the surrounding light became dimmer and dimmer, it was almost dusk, the worm stopped looking for food and went back to where it came from. Xiao Xian still followed it. The further they went, the thinner the fog became. There was basically no fog in the ice field. At this time, Xiao Xian could see the white worm more clearly. Where did it come from? Where is it going now? When the worm reached the edge, it arched its slender body, then moved along the steep slope, stretching the front part of its body downwards. Then it moved the back part of its body so that the two ends touched. When it moved, it bent and stretched, looking like an arch bridge. Its hooked thorax and tail feet were tightly hooked on the ice and rocks, so that its body wouldn't slide down the steep slope. Xiao Xian looked down. The worm's movements were very fast and stable. For it, such a steep slope was like flat ground. Looking at the sky, Xiao Xian didn't follow it down. Instead, he turned back and leaned against an icicle. After eating some ice, he fell asleep. The next day, Xiao Xian saw the white worm again. It followed the same path as yesterday and crawled back to the ice field, starting the same journey to find food. Xiao Xian continued to follow it. Xiao Xian didn't see any other creatures on the ice field. It was rare to encounter such a strange creature, so Xiao Xian planned to observe more. Every day, not long after the sun rose, the white worm would climb up the ice field and look for the thick icicles that hadn't been pecked by the giant eagles. It would gnaw on 1/3 of each icicle's cross-section, but it wouldn't break the icicle. After observing the white worm for 5 days, Xiao Xian decided to follow it down the mountain to take a look. Xiao Xian could handle such a steep slope. The situation on the steep slope was much better than on the ice field at the top of the mountain. There wasn't as much fog. Even if there was fog close to the mountain walls, it was very thin. Most of the time, it could directly touch Yangguan. To be safe, Xiao Xian stayed away from the white worm and followed it closely. But soon, Xiao Xian found that the white worm was much faster than him. It was much faster than when they were on the ice field. Before long, Xiao Xian was left far behind. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian returned to the ice field. He changed his strategy. When the white worm climbed up the ice field the next day, Xiao Xian didn't follow it. Instead, he walked down the steep slope. The white worm would leave tracks on the rocks and thick layers of ice. Xiao Xian only needed to follow these tracks to know where it went down the mountain. On the steep slope, there would be deep holes in the ground where the white worm passed. There were also traces of hooks at the bottom of the holes. Looking at the length of the white worm and following its walking pattern, he could quickly find it. In addition, Xiao Xian went down the mountain during the day, so it wasn't hard to find those holes. Xiao Xian kept going down. From the top of the mountain, a strong wind would blow from time to time. Many small ice particles would directly hit Xiao Xian's body. Xiao Xian could only hold on tightly to the rocks or the hard layer of ice covering the rocks. If he was careless, he would directly fall. If he fell from here, he would undoubtedly die. When they flew up the mountain, Cha-Cha and the big eagle took almost half a day. But now, Xiao Xian had used more than half a day, but he hadn't even reached a third of the way up. However, at this point, the white worm's tracks stopped descending. Instead, it followed the horizontal line and went to other places. Xiao Xian followed the tracks and continued to search. Finally, beside a protruding rock, he saw a nest made of silk. Xiao Xian knew that some meatworms would spit out silk, and so the two sides of leaves together to build a leaf nest. Or they would pull a layer of silk in a sunken area to build a simple nest. When they rested, they would hide in such a nest. When it was time to move, they would come out and look for food. In the few hills around the tribe, this kind of situation was often seen. Sometimes when one peeled off a rolled-up leaf or a folded leaf, one would find a worm hiding inside. And now, what Xiao Xian saw was the white worm's nest. The silk was very transparent. What was strange was that it didn't reflect light. If Xiao Xian hadn't followed the tracks and was blocked by this layer of silk, he wouldn't have found it. After touching and pulling it, Xiao Xian's first thought was that this kind of silk was perfect for making traps. He just didn't know how long it would last. However, for now, Xiao Xian wouldn't touch these silk threads. He would first observe the white worm. Otherwise, it wouldn't be good to alarm it. Chapter 144. Behind this layer of silk, Xiao Xian didn't find anything special at the angle between the protruding rocks and the mountain wall. There were only some crawl marks. He looked carefully again, but didn't find even a single piece of shit. He thought he would find some treasure, but he didn't expect the white worm's nest to be so clean. Xiao Xian looked down the steep slope again, but didn't find any traces of the white worm. It was obvious that the white worm hadn't come down recently. After finding the white worm's nest and finding nothing else, Xiao Xian decided to go back. After taking 2 steps, Xiao Xian stopped and thought for a moment. Xiao Xian walked behind a protruding rock not far from here. Before he left, he cleaned up his tracks and leaned against the rock to wait. Although Yang Guang was there, the ice pellets that fell from time to time weren't enjoyable. The temperature didn't rise, but when Yang Guang gradually disappeared, the temperature dropped sharply. However, for Xiao Xian, who was used to the temperature at the top of the mountain, this temperature was still bearable and he could sleep. When the sun only left a faint light on the horizon, the white worm returned. Because every step it took was tightly wrapped around the ice and rocks, it naturally made a sound. Xiao Xian was resting with his eyes closed, but when he heard the noise, he quickly looked over. From the angle that Xiao Xian chose, he could clearly see the white worm's movements outside and inside the nest. Although the sun had already set, the 2 moons in the sky provided enough light for Xiao Xian to see the situation over there. After eating its fill and returning to the nest, the white worm excreted. One by one, white translucent balls of ice came out from its tail. After the white worm finished excreting, it kicked the balls of ice down the mountain one by one. Xiao Xian, this one was really obsessed with cleanliness. It even knew not to dump feces in its nest. After eating and drinking its fill, the white worm laid down in the nest and didn't move. Xiao Xian didn't look again and leaned against the rock to sleep. The next day, before the sun completely rose, the white worm left the nest. After it, Xiao Xian also went up the mountain. In the next few days, Xiao Xian did not go down the mountain, nor did he follow the white worm. Instead, he continued to explore other places on the ice field. After familiarizing himself with the terrain, Xiao Xian also sped up. A few days later, Xiao Xian returned to his original location. He didn't turn back, but because this ice field was circular, he would naturally return to his original location after walking around. During this process, Xiao Xian encountered a few more insects that looked like the white worm, but he didn't spend any more time tracking them. Xiao Xian returned to the starting point, but he didn't see the white worm anywhere. He looked around and didn't see any traces of the white worm. Curious, Xiao Xian went down the mountain and went to the white worm's nest to investigate. He happened to see the worm that had just finished shedding its skin. The shed skin was the same color as the silk it spat out, transparent. Perhaps because it had just finished shedding its skin, it was a little tired. After resting for a while, it moved and kicked the pile of skin out of the nest. Xiaoxian wanted to take the worm skin to see. The tribe was too short on resources, so if there was something good, they would try to get it. That worm skin might be a rare treasure, but the white worm didn't care about it and kicked it out of the nest. At first, Xiaoxian was worried that the worm skin would be blown away by the strong wind, but the next moment, the worm skin that was kicked off fell straight down and hit the ice below with a bang. Looking at the hole made by the worm skin, Xiaoxian was stunned. Even the worm skin was so heavy, so the white worm itself must be heavier. He really couldn't tell. Xiaoxian couldn't directly go over and get the worm skin now. The white worm was still resting in the nest and had to wait for an opportunity. And this opportunity had been waiting for an entire night. When the sun rose again, the white worm that had shed its skin for a night climbed up the mountain like a ghost. Xiaoxian went over and picked up the worm skin that had been smashed into the snow. After a night, the worm skin was covered with ice and snow. Brushing away the snow, Xiaoxian picked up the worm skin. The heaviness in his hand was completely different from the appearance of this worm skin. However, for people who often move stones in the tribe, this weight was still bearable. Xiaoxian held the transparent worm skin in his hand and could clearly see the lines on his palm. He pulled hard and didn't tear it. It was indeed a good thing. Xiaoxian rolled up the worm skin and tied it with a leather rope from the animal skin bag. Looking around the nest, Xiaoxian didn't find any other worm skin, so he cleaned up the surroundings and went up the mountain. After that, Xiaoxian went to look for other white worms. Following their footsteps, he found the nest and picked up 2 more worm skins. He didn't see the rest. Maybe they hadn't shed their skin yet, or maybe they kicked it too far away and the worm skins weren't around. They could even be wrapped in snow and rolled down the mountain. Xiaoxian saw traces of snow sliding down the mountain in several places. Xiaoxian couldn't do anything about it. While Xiaoxian was looking for worm hives and collecting worm skins, Xiaoxian noticed that the white worms' bodies were becoming transparent. They were originally snow white, but gradually they became translucent, and their transparency increased day by day. Finally, one day, the white worms all disappeared. Xiaoxian saw the worms that had turned into cocoons in the nest. There were no cocoons, but the layer of silk around them was thicker. The cocoons were also transparent and had edges. At first glance, they looked like transparent ice. If you didn't look carefully, you wouldn't be able to see that there was a cocoon there. He didn't know how long this cocoon would last. Xiaoxian would go down the mountain to have a look every few days. He knew a few stone worm nests, and the detailed locations were recorded in his mind, so it wasn't hard to find them. At other times, Xiaoxian would slowly absorb the energy from the ice on the ice pillars. He found that in this place, when he calmed down, his heart was very peaceful. It was very suitable for absorption. The energy on the ice wasn't ordinary energy. It was different from the energy contained in the fire crystal, and it wasn't pure either. However, the energy of the fire crystal could only play a supporting role for Xiaoxian. The totem in his sea of consciousness didn't change at all. This was the difference between Xiaoxian and the others in the tribe. Every time the ice on the pillar absorbed the energy, there would be a very small amount of energy gathered in the totem. This was the fundamental reason why Xiaoxian was able to operate the totem's power. The 2 moons in the night sky gradually became full, and the night became brighter as they got closer. On this day, the 2 moons overlapped. Xiaoxian walked out of the clouds on the top of the mountain and looked at the moon in the night sky. When he was in the tribe, he could hear the roars of the beasts in the forest far away. But here it was very quiet. He couldn't hear any birds or beasts, as if he was isolated from the world. From the first hunt of the year to now, the 2 moons overlapped. In the blink of an eye, nearly half a year had passed. Suddenly, Xiaoxian felt that something seemed to be happening at the bottom of the steep slope. Thinking of the white worms that had turned into pupae, Xiaoxian decided to go down the mountain to have a look. This night Under the overlapping moons, everything was as bright as day. This night was unusual for the beasts and ferocious beasts. Therefore, Xiao Xian was extra careful when he went down the mountain. When he finally came near the white worm nest, Xiao Xian saw a much smaller worm coming out of the nest. It looked like a butterfly without wings, with two club-shaped antennae. When it climbed out and climbed up the protruding rock, white light like electricity was emitted from its body, forming the shape of a wing, and stretched out. The wing grew bigger and bigger, until it almost covered the protruding rock. The white fluorescent wings slowly flapped twice, and then rested for a while. Then, the worm jumped down from the rock, flapped its wings, and flew away. Looking at the distance, there were also some white light spots, which were the white worms in other parts of the mountain. Those white worms that had turned into pupae all turned into butterflies at the same time. There was no starlight in the night sky, and these white butterflies were like the stars in the night. There was still a cold wind with ice and snow, but it didn't seem to have any effect on them, and they continued to fly steadily further and further away. Xiao Xian stood there, watching the light spots become smaller and smaller until they disappeared. Then he retracted his gaze and looked at the white worm nest. The silk was still there. If it continued to stay there, and no one touched it for a long time, the silk net would be blocked by the wind and snow. When the white worms turned into pupae, there would be a thick layer of ice and snow on the silk. Xiao Xian went over and pulled the silk. These silk were not easy to cut. During this time, Xiao Xian had studied the worm's skin, and he found that the wrinkled worm's skin was not easy to flatten, but it was much easier if he instilled totemic power into it. Xiao Xian used the same method to get the silk. Originally, the silk was tightly attached to the rock, almost as if it was one with the rock. After Xiao Xian instilled totemic power into it, he pulled it off with a little force. Unlike the heavy skin that the white worms shed, these silk were very light, which made Xiao Xian even more happy. There was nothing left in the stone worm's nest, not even a broken pupa. He didn't know if it had been kicked down the mountain early, or if it had decomposed on its own, or if it had been eaten by the white worms. It didn't matter if he couldn't find it. For Xiao Xian, getting these silk was already the biggest gain of the night. He went to a few places, raided the white worms' nests, and got quite a lot of silk. Of course, the white worms didn't care about these silk. If they did, they wouldn't have left it here. In some of the nests, the silk nets had been cut and bitten, and then the white worms had let them flutter in the wind. Xiao Xian's operation of collecting the silk lasted for 2 days, and at this time, new giant eagles arrived. Just like when Cha-Cha and the other eagles came, these giant eagles were very tired and looked like they were in poor health like old men in their twilight years. The continuous arrival of these giant eagles made Xiao Xian know that perhaps Cha-Cha and the rest would be back soon. Because the giant eagles had gathered on the ice field again, Xiao Xian didn't run around anymore. He waited at the place where he and Cha-Cha and the rest stood, trying to reduce his presence as much as possible. Xiao Xian chewed on some ice, while paying attention to the giant eagles that passed by. While chewing, Xiao Xian felt that something was wrong. He looked up and saw a giant eagle fall, and with a bang, it fell in front of Xiao Xian. The eagle's head was not far from Xiao Xian, so he could see it very clearly. For a moment, big eyes met small eyes. Chapter 145. This eagle was bigger than the one that had brought them here. It looked like it had traveled a long way and was extremely tired. After falling on the ice, it did not move, only gasping for breath. Originally, it was just looking around casually, but it did not expect to find Xiao Xian. Then, it stared at Xiao Xian as if he was a rare thing. Xiao Xian was still holding a piece of ice in his hand. Being stared at by a giant eagle, he could not eat it. What did that eagle mean? Xiao Xian did not feel any malice from the eagle's eyes. He was just curious about the eagle's reaction. After staring for a while, the eagle looked away and looked at the icicle next to Xiao Xian. Then it looked at Xiao Xian. Did it mean that? Xiao Xian took out his teeth knife and pried a piece of ice off the icicle. When he turned his head, he found that the eagle was staring at the teeth knife in his hand. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian stuck the teeth knife into the ice next to him. He did not take the knife, but raised the ice in his hand. Xiao Xian was about to throw the ice over, but unexpectedly, the eagle opened its mouth. Seeing that Xiao Xian did not move, it raised its curved beak again, as if urging Xiao Xian to move. Xiao Xian moved forward step by step. He did not have a knife, and the eagle did not show any malice. But when facing such a giant beast, he had to be careful. After getting close, Xiao Xian quickly threw the ice in his hand into the eagle's mouth and quickly stepped back. The eagle did not bite. After the ice was thrown in, it swallowed it directly. Then, it continued to open its mouth at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian pried another piece of ice from the icicle and threw it into the eagle's mouth. After more than 10 times, the eagle shook its wings and got up from the ground. When it flapped its wings and rose up, Xiao Xian felt the ice shards and cold mist coming at him. He raised his hand to block them. Compared to the big eagle that brought them here, this eagle in front of them seemed to be familiar with humans. The reason why it showed such a strange expression when it saw Xiao Xian was that Xiao Xian felt that it probably didn't expect to see someone in such a place. Could it be that they also lived in the forest around the hunting grounds? Suddenly, Xiao Xian's eyes narrowed. He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward and stare at the eagle's claws. There was a very vague pattern on it. Although he couldn't see it clearly, Xiao Xian was sure that it wasn't a painting of the Yinjiao tribe. According to the eagle's behavior just now, it didn't seem like an eagle that had never been in contact with humans. There were too many human-like things in its eyes, just like Cha-Cha. It was as if it had been in contact with humans for a long time, which made it different from the giant eagles in the wild. The giant eagle walked with heavy steps to a taller icicle and pecked at the ice on it. Xiao Xian followed it. He got closer and carefully looked at the pattern on the eagle's claws. Because the outer layer of the eagle's claws had begun to fall off, the pattern was incomplete. Xiao Xian could only speculate about the missing part. Thinking that it might be a pattern left by someone from another tribe, Xiao Xian felt a burst of excitement. He had been in this world for so long, but he had never seen anyone other than his tribe. Xiao Xian drew on the ground with his teeth knife. The eagle next to him had almost finished eating. It was much better than before, when it couldn't even stand up. It lowered its head and watched Xiao Xian draw on the ground with his teeth knife. At first, it watched quietly, but after a while, when Xiao Xian drew a stroke, it screamed and scratched the drawing on the ground with its cracked claws. Wrong? Let me try again. After a few strokes, it scratched again. Wrong again? Again. One drew, the other scratched. When the surrounding ice had been scratched, the eagle finally couldn't stand it anymore. It screamed at Xiao Xian and twitched its neck. Hey, what are you doing? Wait. Seeing this, Xiao Xian quickly took a few steps back. Whoa. A pool of vomit fell in front of Xiao Xian. Fortunately, Xiao Xian dodged quickly. Otherwise, he would have been splashed on the head. There were also pieces of meat from some unknown animal in the vomit. Xiao Xian was speechless. Just as he was thinking about whether to hide further away, Xiao Xian's eyes were suddenly attracted by a stone in the pool of vomit. It was a polished stone, only the size of Xiao Xian's palm. Ignoring the disgusting vomit, Xiao Xian quickly walked over and took out the polished stone. After picking it up, Xiao Xian rubbed it on the eagle's feathers, then took it aside and observed it carefully. On the black flat stone, there was a pattern drawn with white paint. It should be the same as the one on the eagle's feet. The pattern looked like an abstract rolling cloud. The material used for the drawing was very strange. After being swallowed by the eagle, the pattern on the stone was not blurred at all. The stone was also intact. Although he didn't know why the eagle swallowed the stone and spat it out spontaneously, Xiao Xian was more concerned about the pattern and the stone. Where did it come from? The eagle in front of him looked at the stone with a very gentle gaze. Unfortunately, the eagle couldn't speak, and Xiao Xian didn't understand its language. He could only guess the general meaning from some of its body movements. However, it spat out the stone because it saw Xiao Xian drawing the pattern wrong again and again, so it couldn't help but show Xiao Xian the correct pattern. The stone was very good, at least of the highest quality. It was made of the highest quality stone and special paint. What was drawn on it was usually a pattern that the painter thought was very important, such as a tribal totem. From this painting, Xiao Xian could feel the reverence of the painter when he painted. He didn't know if this eagle lived in a human tribe like the Cha-Cha, but because they couldn't be engraved, they left a pattern on their feet. Xiao Xian didn't see this pattern on the stone wall of the cave near the mountain foot of the tribe, but the animal skin rolls left by the ancestors might be able to find relevant information. When he went back, he would draw it and show it to the shaman. Thinking of this, Xiao Xian handed the stone back to the eagle, but the eagle just lowered its head and pushed the stone towards Xiao Xian with its curved beak. "Give it to me," Xiao Xian asked in a low voice. There were other giant eagles walking around, so Xiao Xian didn't want to disturb them. The giant eagle screamed, then turned back and walked toward the icicle it had just bitten and fell down beside it. However, its eyes were clear and its breathing was strong. It didn't have any serious injuries or fractures. It was just too tired and couldn't stand stably. When it fell down beside the icicle, it could bite the icicle with its beak. Xiao Xian smiled and shook his head. How long had it flown, and how many battles had it experienced to be so tired? Looking at the stone in his hand, Xiao Xian carefully put it into the animal skin bag. When he went back, he would show it to the shaman. It would be best if he could find some relevant information from the ancient scroll. Originally, Xiao Xian wanted to find a good stone and carve a tribal totem as an exchange. However, after thinking about it, Xiao Xian gave up. Even if he knew about the existence of other tribes, he didn't know if the tribe had any enmity with other tribes. Therefore, he didn't dare to act rashly. Every day, giant mountain eagles of various sizes would arrive. Some of them came alone, while others came in pairs or in groups. However, with that eagle next to him, the other eagles wouldn't come to fight for the territory, let alone notice Xiao Xian. The surrounding eagles became more and more silent. Even the eagle standing next to Xiao Xian didn't want to talk to the outside world. Other than eating, it just stood quietly beside the icicle. Sometimes, when Xiao Xian talked to it, it only responded with a slight sound. When the fog thinned, Xiao Xian knew that it was time. Yang Guang shone the light on the ice field. The fog completely dissipated, and the familiar cry of the eagles sounded again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. One by one, huge and strong figures appeared in the sky above. They cried loudly to vent their excitement, as if they were celebrating their new life. Jiao, the eagle next to him, called to Xiao Xian. It was about to leave. Good luck. Xiao Xian waved to it. Jiao, another eagle cried, but this time it didn't come from the eagle next to him, but from the sky. Xiao Xian put his finger in his mouth and whistled. A figure separated from the group of eagles flying above and flew towards Xiao Xian. After not seeing him for so long, Xiao Xian almost didn't recognize him. The last time they met, Cha-Cha wasn't even as tall as Xiao Xian. Now he had doubled in size. Standing on the ground, he was more than 3 meters tall. The eagles on the ice field had already begun to fly down into the abyss, and Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha were about to return to the tribe. Another eagle cry came from the sky not far away. It was the big eagle that had brought them here before. Its body had also doubled in size. It had a sharp beak, sharp claws, and powerful wings. Its old appearance had completely disappeared, and in its place was a body that was full of strength like that of a young man. That eagle cried to Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha, and then flew away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. We should also go back. Xiao Xian patted Cha-Cha, who was showing off by flapping his wings, and walked towards a steep slope. This time, Xiao Xian didn't need to grab Cha-Cha's claws and could directly jump onto the eagle's back. However, before that, Xiao Xian still had things to take. Wait a moment, I have something to bring. Xiao Xian walked down the steep slope and came to a place and began to dig with his teeth knife. Cha-Cha saw this and also used its claws to help. Previously, when Cha-Cha scratched the rocks, it could only leave shallow marks on the rocks. Now it could easily cut off a large piece of rock with one claw. It was even easier for it to claw ice, as if it was tofu. Soon, Xiao Xian dug out the skin and silk of the white worms that were buried by Xiao Xian. The skin and silk were in good condition. This is very heavy. Can you do it? Xiao Xian raised the 3 rolls of white worm skin and said, "Yeah, okay, let's try it first." Xiao Xian carried the 3 rolls of white worm skin and silk and jumped onto Cha-Cha's back. "Take off." "Jiao!" After a cry, Cha-Cha swooped down. Xiao Xian looked back at the top of the mountain. The mountain peak towered into the clouds and was hidden in the clouds. Surrounded by clouds, the mountain was still the same. Thousands of years had passed, and the ice field at the top of the mountain continued to cycle day after day, with new and old people replacing each other. When they came, they were old and weak, and when they left, they were reborn. Chapter 146. It had to be said that after this trip, although Cha-Cha was not reborn like those older giant eagles, his body size had obviously increased. His endurance and flying speed had improved a lot. Even if he was carrying a person on his back and some heavy objects, he could still handle it easily. After flying down from a mountain, Xiao Xian could no longer see the other giant eagles. They returned to their own homes and had nothing to do with each other. They would only fight each other to the death when it came to a fight over territory. When they saw each other, they would probably think, "Oh, so it's you, kid. You were in the same batch as me when we entered Eagle Mountain." Or maybe it would be hard for them to see each other again in this lifetime. On this trip, Xiao Xian had seen the legendary Eagle Mountain, the so-called land of faith of the giant eagles. He had seen how they had undergone a huge transformation after being reborn here, and how they had collected rare treasures. More importantly, Xiao Xian had seen the first item from a foreign tribe. It could be said that this trip had not been in vain. Although Cha-Cha had grown bigger and could fly faster, it was inevitable that it would encounter a lot of trouble without the protection of a giant eagle. As a result, the return trip had taken a long time. However, on the way back, Xiao Xian had also fought to his heart's content. On the ice field at the top of the mountain, he had spent most of his time quietly absorbing the energy in the ice. Before the arrival of a new batch of giant eagles, he could still walk around, but when the number of giant eagles on the ice field increased, he did not dare to move recklessly. During the time on the ice field, Xiao Xian had discovered that the totem tattoos on his arms had unknowingly extended past his elbows. On the way back to the city, Xiao Xian had a good fight with the ferocious beasts. Of course, Xiao Xian would not overestimate himself and practice with the ferocious beasts that were beyond his ability. Unless there was a sudden crisis, Xiao Xian's practice target was chosen after careful analysis. Many times he would get injured. When he was attacked by the fearsome beasts that were very good at hiding, Xiao Xian had almost lost his life. These were not the kind of beasts they had encountered on the way to Eagle Mountain. Because of the protection of the experienced giant eagle, Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha, who was considered small among the giant mountain eagles, did not become the dung of those fearsome beasts. The dangers in the forest were far beyond Xiao Xian's expectations. Now that he thought about it, he had been too arrogant when he made the decision to leave the tribe with Cha-Cha. Vigilance needed to be stimulated by danger again and again. After a long period of stability, that kind of intuition would gradually fade. It would only be picked up again after the next battle. For Cha-Cha, who liked to fight and held grudges, the snakes in the forest that looked like branches were its mortal enemies. Many times along the way, it ate those snakes. If it could not defeat the big ones, it would pick the smaller ones. After gnawing on ice for nearly a year, Xiao Xian felt like crying when he finally got to eat the warm beast meat roasted over fire. Cha-Cha was the same. When he was biting and pecking, he was quite fierce, as if someone was snatching food from him. Calculating the time, Xiao Xian guessed that it would probably be winter when they returned to the tribe. "Do you miss old Ku, Caesar, and the people in the tribe?" Xiao Xian said, patting Cha-Cha, who was biting and pecking at its prey. Cha-Cha paused its biting, as if it was recalling something. It let out a cry, and then its biting became even fiercer. When it was tearing, the blood on the meat was flung far away. Seeing Cha-Cha like this, Xiao Xian thought that it was probably thinking of the beasts in the tribe that had been successfully branded. It was thinking of teaching them a lesson when they returned. When the familiar severing land appeared in their sight, Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha became more anxious to return. However, even though they were anxious, they still needed to be cautious and alert. After passing through the thorny land, they arrived at the third hunting location. The hunting team had already returned. Xiao Xian did not meet them, but from the traces in the third hunting location, he guessed that the hunting team had only left for 3 or 4 days. The hunting ground was still dangerous, but Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha felt inexplicably relieved. Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha rested in the cave of the third hunting location for one night and continued their journey the next day. The mountain that separated the first and second hunting areas was too high to climb, but after seeing the mountain range beside the Eagle Mountain, they no longer felt that way. They did not choose to go through the mountain passage, but directly climbed over the mountain. Passing through the clouds, the cold mist was very familiar. Just a little more, we're almost there. Jiao, standing on the top of the mountain, Xiao Xian did not feel any tightness in his chest, nor did the low temperature make Xiao Xian shiver. It seemed that everything had become easier. Let's go home. The eagle's claws kicked hard, and it flapped its wings and flew away. In the tribe, this year's hunting was over, and everyone was busy repairing the roof, preparing for the winter. The shaman said that it would be winter tomorrow, so they had to hurry up. Old Ku stood on Caesar's back with one leg and strengthened the windows. After knocking for a while, Old Ku stopped and sighed. He got down from Caesar's back, threw the stone hammer in his hand on the ground, and sat down, looking into the distance. Caesar, when do you think Xian will come back? It's winter, Old Ku said in a low voice. Caesar also lowered his ears and walked around the house, sniffing everywhere, and then went back to Old Ku's side to lie down, listening to Old Ku's sigh. If Xian was here, Xian would definitely be among the 30 people who open up the new hunting route, and the shaman would definitely let Xian go with them. Unfortunately, Xiao Xian left early in the morning and hasn't come back yet. Lei took advantage of him. Old Ku didn't want to give up. For the warriors of the tribe, it was a great honor to be able to participate in opening up a new hunting route. It was said that when the candidates were chosen, the two groups of people on the mountain even fought, and the noise was so loud that people near the mountain foot area could hear it. It was also said that when the two groups were fighting, the shaman just watched quietly and did not stop them. Therefore, some people guessed that the shaman chose people based on their fighting strength. Therefore, the final 30 candidates were all the victors of that contest. However, no one in Mountain Foot area had seen that scene with their own eyes, so everyone's discussion was completely based on hearsay and their own imagination. According to the customs and rules of the tribe, they guessed right, but in fact, only a few people knew the truth. Uncle Ku, I brought the food. Under the shaman's order, Tua brought some processed food. Old Ku's sigh, just now, was also heard by Tu. As one of the people who lived on the mountain and participated in the opening of the new hunting route, he naturally knew the truth better than others. At that time, the chief, the shaman, 2 team leaders, and several elders with a lot of power gathered together to discuss the final candidates. The discussion turned into a quarrel. People in the tribe were like this. Once they were agitated, the quarrel directly turned into action. Other people on the mountain were also called over to join the fight between the two sides. Unlike the usual sparring sessions, the battle that time was beyond everyone's imagination. It was a large-scale internal strife. Several warriors were still in the tribe to recuperate until the end of winter and could go out to participate in the hunting. But the shaman's expression was very calm, so calm that it scared Ta and Gigu. They didn't notice it when they were fighting, but when they saw it again, they found the shaman's expression was very strange. They couldn't tell whether he was sad or angry, and even a little absent-minded, as if he didn't care about the fight between the two most outstanding groups of people in the tribe. It wasn't just the 2 team leaders. Even the old man, who had been relying on his seniority and whose ancestors had produced many leaders, also fell silent. The people who quarreled and fought fiercely were like a basin of cold water poured on them. When the shaman left, he didn't say anything. He just wrote down 30 names on the animal skin roll and then went back to rest calmly. After that, many people went to ask for forgiveness, but the shaman still wore his usual indifferent smile. People who had been with the shaman for a long time knew that he had something on his mind, but even the oldest people in the tribe couldn't guess what he was thinking. The two team leaders wanted to use the results of the new route to make the shamanist feel better. However, the shamanist was not as excited as they thought. Regarding this, the leader and the elders were very curious. However, they could not get an answer from the shamanist. Alas, Tuwa sighed and left after delivering the food. At the door of the house, after Old Ku thanked all, he continued to sit there and talk with Caesar. When Old Ku was talking, Caesar, who was lying on the ground next to him, suddenly stood up, his ears erect, and stared in one direction. Old Ku followed Caesar's line of sight. That was the direction from the hunting ground back to the tribe. Could it be? Old Ku suddenly stood up. Caesar, send me over. Before he finished, Old Ku saw Caesar rush over like an arrow. Old Ku, who was left in the same place, Tuwa, who was thinking with his head down, heard an eagle cry from afar when he was halfway up the mountain. He stopped and looked over, his eyes wide open. Shit, that guy came back. Tuwa quickened his pace and went up the mountain. He had to report to the shaman, hoping that the news of Xian's return could make the shaman feel better. Old Ku stood at the door of the house, looking at the figure in the sky that was getting closer and closer. His eyes were sore, and his hand holding the walking stick was shaking badly. On the mountain, the beasts who were rolling on the ground or stealing food all stopped what they were doing and ran out of the house to look at the sky. The shaman walked out of the stone house and stood at the door, looking at the figure flying down from the sky. It was much bigger than the one in his memory, and the man on the eagle's back with a smile in his eyes. Every time the mountain eagle went to a land of faith, it would grow stronger and grow stronger. It would fly higher and further. When Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha left the tribe, it was just the first hunting trip of the year. Now, they came back just one day before winter. The two guards in front of the stone house winked at each other. It was the first time they saw the shaman smiling so happily. Chapter 147. Cha-Cha landed directly in front of the house. Caesar ran over and ran back. Xiao Xian jumped down from Cha-Cha's back and strode towards Old Ku, giving him a hug. I'm back. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. Old Ku hammered Xiao Xian's shoulder. It's sturdy now. Walking into the house, Xiao Xian glanced around. It was still the same as when he left. The only difference was that there was a wooden box at the side, filled with polished stone tools. These were all Old Ku's masterpieces. Caesar leaned forward with all his might, groaning. Long time no see, old buddy. Looking at Caesar, who was now over 2 meters tall, Xiao Xian raised his hand and rubbed his lowered head. After the excitement, Old Ku realized that something was wrong. He looked outside and saw Cha-Cha standing outside, struggling. In the past, it could still squeeze into the house, but now it obviously couldn't. Even if it didn't spread its wings, it felt that the space was too narrow. Even Caesar, who squeezed into the house, could only raise his feet carefully, afraid that he would accidentally step on something important or bump into a table or chair. This is Cha-Cha. Old Ku walked over with his walking stick, his eyes shining as he looked at it. How did it change so much in less than a year? Xiao Xian poured a pot of water, washed himself casually, and changed his clothes. Then he realized that Old Ku had already cooked the meat soup in the pot. He even added some mountain fruits into it. The first time he drank it, Xiao Xian felt that the taste was strange, but he got used to it and felt that it wasn't bad. During the time he was away, he had to be vigilant at all times. Even if he roasted the meat, it was done in a hurry. He didn't have the time to care about how the meat was roasted. It was fine as long as there was something to eat, not to mention cooking meat soup. When he arrived at Eagle Mountain, he had to chew on ice cubes again. The cold made his teeth chatter. Xiao Xian still remembered it clearly. He hadn't had hot meat soup for nearly a year. After drinking a big bowl of it, his whole body felt warm, and the fatigue from the continuous journey was dispelled. Now that he was back, he felt calm. Old Ku told Xiao Xian about what happened in the tribe during his absence. He told him about the things he complained to Caesar every day. As he spoke, he peeled some nuts he picked from the nearby mountains and threw them into the mouth of Cha-Cha, who stuck his head in through the window. After drinking the soup and ate a few pieces of roasted meat, Xiao Xian said to old Ke, "You rest at home first. I have to go up to the mountains." "Eyes, go up to the mountains? What are you going to do?" Old Ke became nervous. The conflict between the two groups of people on the mountain was getting deeper and deeper. He heard from those who often went up the mountain that there were fights every day, and the fights were quite fierce. "I'm going to find the shaman," Xiao Xian said. Yes, you should go to the shaman." Old Ke was relieved when he heard that Xiao Xian was going to find a shaman. "Go ahead, it's still early. I'll make a bird's nest for Cha-Cha. Hey, there's a lot of wood in the house. 2 days ago, Tu and the little stutterer helped me cut down a lot of trees." Thinking of Tu and the stutterer, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, Xiao Xian smiled. "You can use the wood. If it's not enough, I'll cut more, or let Cha-Cha pull the trees out herself." Without Caesar and Cha-Cha, Xiao Xian left the house, greeted the people he knew along the way, and walked up the mountain. In the tribe, many people saw the eagle flying back, but because they were a little far away, except for those who lived near Xiao Xian at the foot of the mountain, most people didn't notice Cha-Cha's current size. Halfway up the mountain, Xiao Xian was stopped by a rough voice when he was still some distance away from the top. Hearing this voice, Xiao Xian looked over. Kiki. It was Kiki who stopped Xiao Xian. When Tuo went up the mountain to report, Kiki also knew about it. He originally planned to find Xiao Xian tomorrow, but was bored lying on the roof. He didn't expect to see Xiao Xian walking up the mountain, so he immediately ran over. Seeing Kiki's figure, Tuo hurried over to prevent Kiki from injuring Xiao Xian again. "Ah, long time no see. You've grown taller again. I wonder if your strength has improved?" Kiki patted Xiao Xian's shoulder hard, as if they were brothers. Different from old Ke, when old Ke patted, he controlled his strength. Although he was excited, he wouldn't hurt Xiao Xian. But when Kiki patted, Xiao Xian had to use his totem power to resist. Otherwise, he would be the one who got hurt. Before Xiao Xian answered, Kiki continued, "Come on, it's rare for you to come back. Let me see how much you've improved." He hadn't gone out for many days, so his hands were itchy. Recently, he would find someone to practice. Tuo felt a headache. When he was about to pull Kiki away, he heard Xiao Xian say, "Okay." "What?" Tuo opened his eyes wide, looked at Xiao Xian, and shook his head. This guy should refuse. Did he forget that his arm was broken by Kiki? How could he agree? He didn't even hesitate. In the tribe, if both sides agreed, no one could stop them. Tuo could only sigh and step aside to watch. The three of them found a spacious place. Even if they fought fiercely here, not many people would notice. "You first." It was rare for Kiki to have the demeanor of an elder, which was taught by the team leader and Tuo with their fists these years. "Okay." Xiao Xian didn't refuse. He moved his legs and feet. He didn't plan to sneak attack. Instead, he got into a fighting posture and signaled to Kiki that he was going to start. Kiki raised his chin and stood there calmly. He didn't think that Xiao Xian could hurt him. He had absorbed the fire crystal and experienced the killing in the hunting ground. Moreover, he was now an intermediate totem warrior, one of the 30 people who opened up the new route. He thought that he was much stronger than the people at the foot of the mountain, including Xiao Xian. He was here today because he wanted to test Xiao Xian's strength. If Xiao Xian's strength was good enough, they could discuss with Gue, his people, and ask them to give him a list of names. Luckily, one of their people was injured when they went out last time. Thinking that he could fight with them again, Kiki was full of energy. He looked at Xiao Xian with urging eyes. Hurry up so that he could find trouble with them after the fight. Xiao Xian took a deep breath and stomped his feet on the ground, as if a ferocious beast was stomping on the ground. The stones under his feet and the ground around him instantly cracked. Every step he took would bring up a burst of debris and stone powder. If Mai's hunting group were here, they would know that this was not Xiao Xian's usual style. When Xiao Xian was hunting, he focused on speed and dexterity. He would catch his prey by surprise and find the best opportunity to give them a fatal blow. But now, Xiao Xian was showing a straightforward style, rude and strong. Feeling the momentum coming towards him, Kiki was happy. This guy had the style of those big, ferocious beasts in the forest, fierce and straightforward. Judging from his appearance, he shouldn't be too far away from Lei. He should be almost an intermediate totem warrior. In 1 or 2 years, he would be able to cross this hurdle. No wonder the shaman always thought highly of him. Thinking of this, Kiki didn't avoid Xiao Xian's fist, but raised his arm in front of his body to block it. He was very confident. The fist and the arm collided, making a crisp sound of muscles colliding. Bang! Under the collision, Keek's pupils shrank, and he felt a burning pain in his arm. His legs, which had been standing firmly on the ground, became much lighter in an instant. His body, which was firmly rooted to the ground, lost its balance at this moment. He was shaken by this overbearing force and moved back a little. But this little movement made Tuo, who was watching from the side, know that Keek's situation was not good. Before Kiki had time to be surprised, Xiao Xian had already closed in on him. Because of the totem power, the muscles in his arms swelled and became tighter. His 5 fingers clenched into a fist, and his arm was instantly raised high and then quickly smashed down. Bang! Under this great force, Kiki could only move back to adjust his body's balance, but his eyes were fixed on Xiao Xian in front of him. How could he change so much? He thought back to the time when he received the order from the team leader to test this kid. What kind of situation was that? Kiki couldn't remember, but vaguely felt that the figure in his impression was not so tall or so strong. He could send him flying with 1 punch and accidentally broke this guy's arm. Feeling the wind of the fist getting faster and faster, Kiki was a little confused and forgot how to find a chance to fight back. He just held his breath and forcibly resisted Xiao Xian's attack. He always felt that he should be able to resist. How could this guy be so strong? It was impossible. Keek's body was violently smashed like a rainstorm, and he kept moving back. He moved faster and faster, and with each step, he moved back more and more. The sound of the stones on the ground being stepped on was like a thunder drum, and the gravel flew around. Bang! Crack! The sound of the fist colliding with the arm muscles was heard again, but this time, it was Kiki who was sent flying and heavily hit the ground. Standing next to him, Tuo stared at Xiao Xian in disbelief, and then looked at Kiki who was sent flying. He swallowed his saliva. Moreover, the sound that was heard at the same time as the last punch was, "No way." Tuo felt a little dizzy. Xiao Xian was panting, looking at Kiki who was sent flying. He moved his shoulders, clenched his fists, opened his 5 fingers, and suddenly clenched them. When he clenched his fists, the bones in his fingers made a crisp sound, but they were full of strength. Because he had just fought against Kiki, who was also a mid-level totem warrior, in a short period of time, his sore muscles were twitching faintly, but the power contained in them was surging. Compared to the time when he was suppressed by Kiki, he felt much better. On the other side, Kiki, who was lying on the ground, was muttering something. He only felt that the muscles in his legs were twitching, especially the arm that took Xiao Xian's fist. His arm bones were definitely broken. Feeling the injuries on his body, Keek's face was full of disbelief. But soon, Kiki came to himself. Looking at Xiao Xian, who was about to turn around and leave, he hurriedly said, "Hey, wait, Xian. I'll find you in a few days when I'm better. Let's have another fight." Xiao Xian didn't look back. He waved his hand and continued to walk to the top of the mountain. Not far from where Xiao Xian and Kiki had just fought, Lei stood behind a big stone with a gloomy look. Among the 30 people who had opened up the new route, only one was under the age of 20. Originally, the shaman had reserved it for Xiao Xian, but because Xiao Xian hadn't come back, Lei's grandfather took it away. Now that Xiao Xian had come back, it seemed that he was going to find the shaman. Did he want to take it back? The people of the tower would never let go of this opportunity. No, absolutely not. However, after seeing the fight between Xiao Xian and Kiki, could he beat him? Thinking of this, Lei immediately ran back. He had to tell his grandfather first. Chapter 148. The shaman seemed to have known that Xiao Xian would come up the mountain, so he just sat in the stone house and waited. The guards at the door smiled kindly when they saw Xiao Xian. The shaman is waiting inside. One of them whispered to Xiao Xian. Thank you. Xiao Xian thanked them and walked into the house. Seeing the shaman sitting there, Xiao Xian felt that the shaman was very tired, not physically, but mentally. It seemed that the shaman had aged a lot in the past year. Xiao Xian walked to the low stone table and sat down, asking, Are you okay? The shaman nodded with a smile. The wrinkles on his face were deeper because of the changes in his face. Looking at Xiao Xian carefully, the shaman was very pleased. How was the journey? Very good. I learned a lot. I will draw it for you when the time comes. Of course, you have to provide some animal skins and pigments. I don't have them now. Although Xiao Xian had said that he would draw the experience of this journey in the form of a scroll, there were too many things that he had experienced, so it was impossible to draw everything. There were some things that Xiao Xian had to mention to the shaman. As for the eagle that led the way, the high mountain range, the ice field at the top of the mountain, the mysterious eagle mountain, and the strange white insects, Xiao Xian would describe them in detail and draw them on the wu roll. The shaman listened very carefully. Sometimes he would think about the records passed down by his ancestors. He didn't interrupt and let Xiao Xian talk. He was afraid that he would miss some details if he interrupted. When Xiao Xian finally finished, the shaman was still in a daze. It took a while for him to come back to his senses. The Eagle Mountain really exists. The shaman sighed. When he saw the little bird that Xiao Xian took out, he knew that it would grow into a big bird. Xiao Xian once asked him if he had ever thought about going outside the tribe to find people from other tribes. In fact, the shamans had thought about this for a long time. This was something that every shaman had thought about, but no one had succeeded. When the shaman saw the eagle, he had an idea. He thought, what if one day the eagle could grow up smoothly and grow big enough to fly over the surrounding obstacles and go to places further away where the warriors of the tribe could not reach? According to the ancestral records, the giant mountain eagles were a race that did not fear the peak of the mountain. When they see a tall mountain, they will not think of avoiding it, but of conquering it. In every hunting ground, there were mountains that the warriors couldn't climb over, blocking their way forward. When they hunted, they would avoid those places. Even the ancestors who opened up the hunting route back then avoided those mountains. Unless they found another route to pass through that mountain, they would go around it. If they couldn't go around it, they would change their route. The others in the tribe didn't know that the ancestors had encountered many obstacles when they were setting up hunting routes. In the end, they had to give up the original route and change it to the current ones. What stopped the warriors were not the bloodthirsty, ferocious beasts, but the mountains, the wide rivers, and the dangerous places. But if there was a giant mountain eagle that could fly directly over the mountains, then all the obstacles would be overcome. If the eagle was lucky enough to survive and grow up smoothly, even if the shaman couldn't see it in his lifetime, he would write his thoughts on the animal skin scroll and pass it on to the next shaman, and the one after that, and even the successor of the shaman hundreds of years later. He hoped that they would be able to see the day when they could truly go out. That was why he gave Cha-Cha better protection than Caesar on the first day he saw him. But now, he didn't expect that Xiao Xian could take Cha-Cha to the Eagle Mountain and help Cha-Cha complete the first stage of his growth. Everything seemed to be full of hope. A few years ago, he was very excited about opening up a new route. However, after Xiao Xian mentioned to him about the outside tribes, he felt that compared to going out, whether it was opening up a new route or other things, they were not important. That was why he was so calm when Ta and Gigu were fighting. But he wouldn't tell anyone about this. After all, in the eyes of others, there were many things that were illusory and unreal. As the spiritual leader of the tribe, he couldn't act on impulse when he wasn't absolutely sure. Good. Very good. Xian, next time you come here, bring Cha-Cha with you. The shaman said happily. Yes, next time I'll bring him with me. He has grown so much that he can't fit in the room. Xiao Xian said. When he heard that Cha-Cha had grown so big that he couldn't fit in the room, the shaman smiled so widely that his eyes narrowed. He couldn't wait to call Cha-Cha over and praise him. Xiao Xian looked at the overjoyed shaman and scratched the goosebumps on his arm. He wanted to say something, but stopped himself. The shaman was a little emotional now. Should he say that now, or find another chance to say it. At his age, he couldn't take it anymore. What? Are there other changes? The shaman's smile faded as he asked. Well, how far do you think the outside tribes are from us? Xiao Xian asked. The shaman's smile reappeared, full of expectation. As long as Cha-Cha grows strong enough, he can find other tribes. Believe me, that day will come. Then, the shaman became a little disappointed and sighed. But maybe I won't be able to see that day. Xiao Xian didn't say anything. He only reached into the animal skin bag and took out the stone that the giant eagle had given him. He took it out and placed it on the stone table in front of him. After returning, Xiao Xian carefully cleaned the stone again. This time, there was no strange smell. As for the shamaness, when she saw what Xiao Xian had placed on the stone table, she sighed and froze. The shaman seemed to be frozen. He maintained his posture, and even his expression was frozen. Only his eyes were fixed on the palm-sized flat stone that Xiao Xian had placed on the stone table. Gurgle, gurgle. The shaman wanted to say something, but he only made some meaningless sounds, as if there was something stuck in his throat. Hey, are you okay? Calm down a little. Take a deep breath. Inhale. Xiao Xian was frightened when he saw the shaman like this. He waved his hand in front of the shaman's eyes and quickly patted his back. Take a deep breath like this. Huff. Xiao Xian, who was standing in front of the shaman, was pushed to the side by the shaman. The shaman's whole body was trembling. When he raised his hand and reached for the stone, his hand was shaking so hard that if he was holding a ladle of soup, the soup would be gone. Seeing that the shaman had finally calmed down, Xiao Xian sat back down. I didn't finish. This stone was given to me by a very large eagle. It almost vomited all over me. Xiao Xian told the shaman what had happened at that time, how he found the pattern on the eagle's foot and how he fed it. The shaman treated the stone as if it was an extremely precious and fragile object. He carefully touched the stone and listened to Xiao Xian's story without missing a single word. After Xiao Xian finished, the shaman picked up the stone with the pattern on it and carefully looked at the picture on it. The picture looked like a rolling cloud. The shaman searched his memory and said with a trembling voice due to excitement, I remember this picture was in the ancestors' animal skin scroll. Wait, I'll go look through it. Xiao Xian only felt a gust of wind blow in front of him, and the shaman disappeared. Soon, the shaman returned, took the stone from the stone table, and left again. Looking around, Xiao Xian got up and poured himself a cup of water. He slowly drank and waited. Halfway through, when the people outside came in to change the tea for the shaman, they saw Xiao Xian sitting there peacefully, and their faces twitched. Xiao Xian was probably the first person who could drink tea in the shaman's place. Even if they were the two team leaders, they would still be subconsciously restrained here. After about half an hour, the shaman came back like a gust of wind and called Xiao Xian, Follow me, we're going to find Xing. Xiao Xian knew who the Xing the shaman was talking about. When he came here in the past, he saw Xing a few times. That person was older than the shaman, and it was said that many of his ancestors had been leaders and shaman. His words had more weight in the tribe, and when there were important matters to discuss, he would be called over. However, that old man didn't seem to be easy to talk to. Xiao Xian remembered that the old man's gaze was not good. It was like a knife, as if he couldn't wait to cut him a few times. The shaman took Xiao Xian out of the stone house and went to another place on the mountain. At this time, there were many people chatting outside. As they were talking, they saw the shaman quickly move his old legs and was past them. They didn't even have time to salute. That's the shaman, a warrior said. It seems so. What happened? Why is the shaman so anxious? Didn't you see who was following behind the shaman? They seem to be heading towards Lei's house. Lei's grandfather is Xing. At this, a few people had an I understand look on their faces. It seemed that the shaman was going to fight for a spot with Xiao Xian. In Gigu's hunting team, although he was the team leader, he would often listen to Xing's opinions. If the shaman asked for a spot for Xiao Xian, it was unknown if Xing would agree. As for adding another person, that was even more impossible. Back then, when he swore to the fire seed by the fire pit, he said that there would only be 30 people. There wouldn't be one more person, and there wouldn't be one less. At this moment, Xing was sitting in the house with his eyes half closed, deep in thought. Xing's father had once told him earnestly, "You have to have a long-term vision. Don't just look at the people around you." Therefore, Xing felt that it was too monotonous for his descendants to be limited to the original hunting route. If they were going to do something, they should do something big. Opening up a new hunting route would be a glory that no one, other than their ancestors, could achieve in hundreds of years. This kind of glory would naturally be shared by his own people. As for the others, he didn't care. Thinking about what Lei had said when he came back, Xing snorted heavily. Why would the shaman treat the people on the mountain badly for a kid from the foot of the mountain? As he was thinking, the shaman had already brought Xiao Xian over. Because it was the shaman, no one in the family dared to stop him. Although he was older than the shaman and had a higher status in the tribe, he still had to respect the shaman. Xing stood up and bowed to the shaman. As for Xiao Xian, who was beside the shaman, he pretended not to see him. "Xian, close the door," the shaman said to Xiao Xian, who was behind him. Xing's room was different from the others, who only used animal skin or grass curtains. Instead, there was a wooden plank. Xiao Xian pulled the plank horizontally, blocking the view of the people outside the room. Seeing the shaman like this, Xing was also angry. He was about to say something when he saw the shaman carefully place the item in his hand on the table beside him. All of Xing's anger, all of his words, was replaced by another emotion the moment he saw this stone. The muscles on his face were twisted, probably because his emotions were too complicated and he was too agitated. Xiao Xian felt the goosebumps on his arms increase. Chapter 149. Xiao Xian knew that tribesmen would be very curious about things from other tribes. However, for someone like Xing, who always had a serious expression on his face, it was hard to believe that he would be so excited. Xing's nostrils flared and his nostrils flared. His breathing became hurried, each breath heavier than the last. His old face was flushed red. This is... Xing carefully picked up the stone and examined it carefully. At his age, whether it was hunting or crafting stone tools, he had more experience than most people in the tribe. Naturally, he could tell that this stone had not been crafted for too long. Perhaps it was only a few years, or at most a dozen years. However, if this stone was not left behind by the ancestors, then where did it come from? Thinking of how the shamaness rushed over, if it was just for a kid from the foot of the mountain, it really shouldn't be. Then, the shamaness' main purpose was naturally this stone. Thinking of this, Xing no longer cared about the 30 spots, the opening of a new route, or the competition between the two sides. The only thing he wanted to know now was the origin of this stone. The shamaness sat there, not as anxious as before. Although her breathing was still a little unstable, and the hand holding the walking stick was still trembling, her face had already returned to her usual calm and profound self. "This is the reason why I came," the shamaness said. Just as Xing subconsciously leaned towards the shamaness, pricking up his ears to listen carefully, the shamaness said slowly with a slightly trembling voice, "Xian, tell Lao Xing, how did you get this stone?" Xing was stunned, his eyes widening as he looked at Xiao Xian. The shamaness' words had stunned him. What, this stone was obtained by Xian? Where did he get it from? No, this kid had disappeared for almost a year. "You, hurry up and tell me." In front of Xiao Xian, Xing's tone was not as pleasant. He couldn't control his impatience, and his usual style of speaking made it sound like he was interrogating someone. His eyes were like two sharp knives, itching to stab you in the face. However, Xiao Xian did not mind Xing's tone. With the shamaness here, Xing could not do anything to him. "It's like this," Xiao Xian briefly explained the origins of the stone. Seeing how anxious Xing was, he skipped a lot of details and only emphasized how he obtained the stone. It's the Hui tribe." Xing's eyes were bloodshot as he looked at the shaman and said, "You came here to confirm it, right?" The shaman nodded. "So, I hope you could take that thing out and let me have a look." Taking in a deep breath, Xing carefully placed the stone in his hand back, as though he was dealing with a fragile object. Every single movement he made was done with extreme caution. He controlled his strength, fearing that he might accidentally break a corner of the stone. If the members of the Xing clan were to know that the usually resolute and domineering Xing had such a gentle attitude, their jaws would probably drop in shock. Xing's room was about 20 square meters. Aside from a stone table, a few wooden chairs, and a bed, there was also an especially large stone vat with boxes of various sizes inside. Half kneeling on the ground, Xing opened the stone vat and reached out with both hands to take out a stone box. Just like before, he was also very careful. Every single movement seemed to have been carefully thought out. Xiao Xian also noticed that when Xing looked at the stone box, his eyes were filled with reverence. His emotions were very passionate. His originally sharp gaze was now focused on the stone box, as though everything around him was nothing. Carefully placing the stone box on the table, Xing opened it. Xiao Xian stretched his neck to take a look. Inside, there was another box. Between the big and small boxes, there were some wood shavings. Obviously, they were there to act as a buffer. Xing took out the small box and carefully wiped away the wood shavings on the outside. His gentleness was completely different from the way he usually beat someone up. He opened the lid. Inside, there were also some wood shavings. In the middle, there was something wrapped in thick bee's skin. Xiao Xian had hunted for so long, so he could naturally tell the quality of this beast skin. It was the beast skin of a high-grade beast. Generally, the beast skin of a high-grade beast was very hard, but there were also soft parts. It was just that it was relatively rare. High-quality stone, special wood shavings, and this rare beast skin were all used to protect the thing inside. This made Xiao Xian even more curious as he stared at Xing's actions. Xing carefully and attentively carried the item out of the bag. He opened the animal's skin, and the item inside was immediately presented to Xiao Xian's eyes. Xiao Xian stared at the table, the thing that Xing and the shaman were eagerly looking at like an extremely precious treasure. He blinked again, and looked over again. Xiao Xian didn't know what kind of expression he should show to express his current feelings. He only felt a group of forest raccos running over and over again in his heart. Before this, based on the shaman and Xing's attitudes, and based on what they said, he deduced that Xing might have something from an external tribe, and that it was extremely precious. Hence, Xiao Xian thought that it was probably a rare treasure. For example, the ice blocks he saw in the mountains near Eagle Mountain, or the skin and silk of white worms or fire crystals. Or even something more rugged, like a part of a high-grade beast, which the tribesmen loved to treasure. But he didn't expect to see something so unexpected. The thing that Xing was carefully treating was a clay pot, and it was a colored pottery. There were some drawings on the pot, and the style was similar to the drawings on the stone he brought back. Every stroke was curled like a whirlpool. Seeing Xiao Xian staring blankly at the pot on the table, Xing couldn't help but smile. "You've never seen it before, right?" Xing smiled proudly. Xiao Xian dumbfounded. Xing continued to smile proudly. "Xiao Xian, this is a treasure passed down from my ancestors. It comes from an external tribe, and it's not made of stone." Xing felt that Xiao Xian, this kid from the foot of the mountain, was ignorant. He probably didn't know how precious this pot was, because until now, the tribe had never successfully made a single piece of pottery. Even if they had the animal skin scroll passed down from their ancestors, they had never succeeded. Later on, the items left behind from thousands of years ago naturally became priceless treasures of the tribe. They carried too many unspeakable secrets of the tribe, and the families who kept these pots naturally developed a sense of superiority. Although these pots were very fragile, and although they didn't bring much strength to the totemic warriors, even if others took out the most powerful beast, they wouldn't trade it away. Like that family, they also have a treasure passed down from their ancestors. It's also a pot, but it's a pity that their pot doesn't have any drawings on it. It's very ugly, and when it's placed next to mine, it's like the difference between a weak herbivore and a fierce carnivore. Xing continued. In the hearts of the tribesmen, those weak and herbivorous animals were all cowards, and they looked down on them. However, those ferocious and bloodthirsty carnivorous beasts were different. They were the strong, the true strong of the forest. They would always look up to the strong. Xiao Xian. This old man was so proud that his tail was wagging. No matter how serious he was, he couldn't hide the smug smile on his old face, making people want to punch him. No wonder when he listened to the gossip of the tribe's upper echelons, he always heard Xing arguing with the other old men. Other than the way they did things, it was probably because of this pot. This was a sense of superiority. Xiao Xian opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. This was probably the difference between non-indigenous people and indigenous people. Xiao Xian observed the pot. The drawings on the pot had a natural element to them. Those simple lines were like clouds and wind. Other than that, there was also a human face, but every stroke was drawn with swirling lines, giving it a sense of exaggeration. The painter consciously changed the patterns of the human face. The colors of the lines were red, brown, and decorated the pot in a painting style. To the tribesmen, this wasn't just a form of beauty. More importantly, these drawings also contained the totem images of the tribe's witchcraft rituals, giving people a sense of wonder. This was also the symbol of the tribe. Looking at the drawings with this style, one would know which tribe it was produced by. Just now, Xing had said that this was produced by the Hui tribe. Back then, did the ancestors of the tribe have any relations with the Hui tribe? The shamaness looked at Xing, who was talking nonstop, and shook her head with a bitter smile. Whenever they talked about the pot, Xing would always be like this, completely different from his usual self. After talking for a while, seeing that the other two didn't respond, Xing thought of the stone Xiao Xian took out and shut his mouth. Then, thinking of the patterns on the stone, Xing carefully picked up the pot and let Xiao Xian and the shamaness see the patterns on the bottom of the pot. It was exactly the same as the pattern on the stone. This should be the Hui tribe, Xing said. In the past, he had always thought that the other tribes that the ancestors talked about were too far away from the tribe, so far that it would be hard to meet one even in thousands of years. Other than the old objects left behind by the ancestors, there were no other new things from the other tribes. He didn't expect to see one today. Didn't this mean that in his lifetime, he would be able to see things from other tribes like the Hui tribe or people? Thinking about it, Xing couldn't help but feel excited. He looked at the shamaness fervently, wanting to get a definite answer from her. At least, he had some hope. The shamaness was the wisest person in the tribe. If there was anyone who could solve this big problem, other than the shamaness, Xing couldn't think of anyone else. I have an idea. The shamaness told Xing about her idea of flying out of the tribe through the cha-cha. Listening to the shamaness seriously, Xing couldn't help but nod. That's right. There are indeed many obstacles in the forest. If we could fly over, that would be great. Xiao Xian listened to the discussion between the shamaness and Xing and interrupted. Actually, we can try to fly over from that big river. The two were thinking about how to fly over the mountains and swamps, looked at Xiao Xian at the same time. Chapter 150. Xiao Xian scratched his head as the two stared at him. Actually, I've been paying attention to that river for a long time. You want Cha-Cha to fly across? The shaman shook his head. That river should be very wide. Cha-Cha wouldn't have a place to rest along the way. Moreover, there are river beasts in the river. Even after 2 more stages of growth, Cha-Cha might not be able to fly across. Flying without food or water, the chances of success were too low. Xing also gave Xiao Xian a look that said, young people are indeed simple-minded. No, it's not just Cha-Cha's flight. I want to build a boat. A simple canoe will do. There are many giant trees in the forest. It won't be difficult, Xiao Xian said. Boat? I've seen this term in the animal skin scroll left behind by my ancestors. I also know about rafts. However, Xian, the trees in the river will sink very quickly. There are wood-eating river beasts in the river. The shaman frowned. Although he rarely went to the river, he had heard many things about it. If they were to build a boat, it would disappear not long after it entered the river. Most of the time, that's the case. However, during the rainy season, those wood-eating worms will leave for a period of time like the river beasts. They will only return when the 2 moons overlap. What? Is what you said true? Not only the shaman, even Xing, who thought Xiao Xian was dreaming, couldn't help but stand up and ask. If what Xiao Xian said was true, they could really give it a try. Xiao Xian told them about his discoveries in the past few years. Of course, everything was just a guess. However, Xiao Xian knew that as long as there was a glimmer of hope, the shaman would give it a try. After Xiao Xian finished, the shaman and Xing fell silent. Each of them pondered and analyzed the feasibility of Xiao Xian's idea. After a while, Xing spoke first. If that's the case, we can give it a try. If Xian can't do it, this old man can go personally. The shaman raised his eyelids and looked at Xing. Do you think Cha-Cha will listen to you? Xing was speechless. Although he hadn't come into contact with the eagle, he had heard from his grandson and others that the eagle's temper wasn't very good. Other than Xian, it wouldn't listen to anyone else. Even without it, I can still use that ship. Xing spoke, but he wasn't confident enough. He also knew that his words weren't true and the feasibility of it was too low. It was a method that would only cause them to lose their lives for nothing. How about this, Xian? Wait until next year's rainy season. You can take a look. After waiting for so many years, a few more years won't hurt. You have to make more preparations. As for this matter, don't tell anyone for the time being, the shaman said. The last sentence was said while looking at Xing. I know. Xing looked at the engraved pot on the table and then at the stone beside it. He added, if there's anything you need me to do, just let me know. Although Xing still didn't look at Xiao Xian in a good light, the fact that he could express his opinion on this matter meant that Xing and the shaman had the same thoughts. Getting out of this place was the most important thing. As for opening up a new hunting route, that was secondary. This was an obsession that had been passed down from their ancestors. Since the matter had been explained, the shaman took back the stone and left with Xiao Xian. When the shaman took back the stone, Xing's eyes were glued to it. If the one holding the stone was Xiao Xian, Xing would probably snatch it right away. What a strange thought. Xiao Xian followed behind the shaman, thinking about Xing's reaction. But then he changed his mind and laughed. Perhaps, to the people in the tribe, his own thoughts were the strangest. After the shaman left with Xiao Xian, Xing looked at the engraved pot and gently caressed it. He cried and laughed at the same time. His old face was filled with tears. After a while, when Xing's emotions had calmed down, he carefully kept the pot and opened the window. He was lost in thought as he looked out of the window. Outside the window, it was pitch black. Winter was coming. The darkest time of the year was coming. However, he didn't feel as depressed as before. He always felt that there was an intense emotion that was about to break through and explode out. The fire in the house burned, and the wood crackled. Xing sat back on the wooden chair, recalling what Xiao Xian said over and over again. Feeling that it wasn't enough, he took out a piece of animal skin and recorded everything he remembered. Knock, knock, knock. Someone knocked on the wooden door of Xing's room. After the shaman and Xiao Xian left, Xing closed the door again. Everyone in the family knew that once the door was closed, it meant that the old man didn't want to be disturbed. If there was something, they had to knock on the wooden plank to get permission to enter. If they entered without permission, the old man would go crazy. The consequences of the old man's anger were very serious. No one wanted to provoke Xing. Just like when the shaman went in and closed the door, everyone in the family left the house on their own accord. They didn't want to eavesdrop. They only came back after the shaman and Xiao Xian left. Grandfather? Lei was standing outside the door. Come in, Xing said. Lei moved the wooden plank and walked in. Just as he was about to say something, he noticed that Xing was acting strangely. However, he didn't dare to ask. After thinking for a while, he asked the question that he wanted to ask. Grandfather, did the shaman want to let Xian join the 30 people? Xing didn't answer. Lei didn't know what his grandfather meant. After waiting for a while, he looked over and saw that his grandfather was in a daze, staring at the fire. He didn't know what his grandfather was thinking about. This was too unbelievable. His grandfather was actually in a daze. Why don't I ask again? When he thought of fighting for a spot, Xing took out a piece of fire crystal that he had been keeping for a long time. He wanted Lei to improve a little and join the team that opened up the new route. This meant that the old man's thoughts were leaning towards his side. Lei thought, Gathering his courage, Lei asked again, "Grandfather, does the shaman want Xian to join the team that opened up the new route?" This time, Xing had a reaction. Let Xian join the team that opened up the new route? Definitely not. Xing suddenly became agitated. That's right. If you want to give it to someone, you should give it to someone on our side. Lei agreed. However, before Lei could finish his disdainful words about Xiao Xian, he heard his grandfather say, "Opening up the new route is too dangerous. If Xian goes in, he might be injured or killed by a fearsome beast. What should we do then?" Definitely not. He can't be injured, and he can't die. Lei, grandfather, the grandson that you personally recommended to join the hunting team that opened up the new route, is still standing in front of you. Xing didn't see the struggle on Lei's face. Even if he did, he wouldn't care. What he was thinking now was what to do. After the conversation just now, he didn't want Xian to go out with the hunting team, not to mention opening up a new route that was even more dangerous. Don't let Xian join the hunting team. However, if he didn't have enough training when he left in the future, he would have to face more unknown factors and more severe challenges. When that time comes, if he didn't have enough ability to protect himself, how could he succeed? However, if he was eaten by a fearsome beast before he could even take action, hiss, what a headache. This was the first time Xing felt so conflicted. He was in a dilemma. Lei looked at his grandfather pulling at his beard with a bitter face. He didn't even realize that he had pulled out a few strands. After thinking for a while, Lei asked tentatively, "Then why did the shaman bring Xian here?" Xing had already come back to his senses. Hearing Lei's question, he didn't explain. Instead, like his father and grandfather, he said earnestly, "I told you before, you need to have a long-term vision." Lei lowered his eyelids and thought to himself, "You always mean different things when you say long-term vision." In the end, Lei still couldn't get an answer from Xing. Instead, he was chased out by Xing with a glare. In the dark night, the night swallow at the foot of the mountain flew in the air. In the middle of the night, everything quieted down. The temperature dropped sharply. The wind carried snow and ice, wreaking havoc on the land. This was an unusual winter. In this winter, the shaman didn't take care of other things. He handed it over to the other assistants and asked Gui Zhe to start training. Every time Xiao Xian went up the mountain to look for the shaman, Xing would brave the wind and snow to run over. He wanted to hear more about the progress of the plan. At first, it was only the shaman and Xing. Later, the shaman told Chief Ao. As the chief, Ao had the right to know about this plan. Later, the few elders in the tribe who had some authority heard about this news. Hence, the moment Xiao Xian went up the mountain, the elders and the chief all ran to the shaman. However, they didn't want to tell the two team leaders about this because the two team leaders had to focus on opening up a new route. It wouldn't be good if they were distracted. Because of this, the two team leaders were very depressed. They always felt that they were outside the core of the tribe. No matter which camp these elders belonged to, no matter what they thought of Xiao Xian, after knowing about the plan of the shaman and Xiao Xian, they all made the same decision. For the sake of the shaman and Xiao Xian's plan, they would do their best to help. No. They didn't have much time left. Compared to the young men who had more time, they hoped that before they died, they would know whether this plan was successful or not. That was enough. As for walking out of this place, it was an extravagant hope for them. Humans shouldn't be too greedy. Just like the ferocious beasts in the forest, sometimes they didn't know how to be content. Instead, they would lose their lives in vain. However, some people always had this extravagant hope. They thought that perhaps one day they would be able to walk to the place in the stories told by their ancestors and see other humans besides their own tribe members. When winter ended and the earth warmed up, the tribe became lively again. When they were preparing for the sacrificial ceremony, Xiao Xian was chosen to dance again. This made many people unhappy, especially the young warriors. In the past, when Xiao Xian found the fire crystals and was chosen, they didn't have any objections. However, Xiao Xian hadn't been in the tribe for the past year. What merit did he have? However, they found that no matter how dissatisfied they were, even if they complained to the elders who were in the opposite camp, they only got one sentence. He deserves it. The two team leaders also had a headache. Recently, there were always people coming to them to talk about Xiao Xian, but they really didn't know. When they went to the shaman, the chief, or the other elders, they only got one sentence. Don't think about other things. Continue to open up new routes. Chapter 151. The tribe looked the same as before, but upon closer inspection, it wasn't hard to notice that many changes were happening quietly. Then, when everyone gathered together to discuss, they realized that there were so many situations that were different from the past. For example, there were always a few old figures walking back and forth by the river in front of the tribe. Not only them, but even the chief often wandered by the river, which made the people living in the mountain foot area very curious. Even if they were not catching fish, they would go to the river from time to time. Gradually, they formed a habit of going to the river when they had nothing to do. Maybe they could meet a senior leader of the tribe and talk about life. And the people in the mountain also found that those bad-tempered old men were very nice to Xiao Xian. They couldn't believe it. Later, even the two team leaders looked at Xiao Xian with strange eyes. There was another thing that puzzled everyone. During the rainy season, several important people on the mountain actually braved the rain and ran to the river every day. This was something that had never happened before. The words passed down from generation to generation made the warriors in the tribe afraid of the river. In recent years, the situation became a little better after fishing, but it was not enough to make those important people on the mountain come see it, right? Those who were confused continued to be confused, and those who were looking forward to it continued to look forward to it. It was another rainy season. In this year, Xiao Xian's body was 16 years old. After the ceremony, several important people on the mountain began to lose sleep every day. They were nervous and excited and gathered together to discuss whether the plan needed to be changed. Looking for wood, building boats, making sails, and so on, a series of movements could not be hidden from too many people. During this year's ceremony, the shaman told them about Xiao Xian's sailing. This news made the whole tribe talk about it for a long time, and it did not stop until the rainy season. Xiao Xian was often stopped by people, asking all kinds of questions about the trip. Everyone in the tribe had a strong sense of expectation. Although they did not understand a lot of what the shaman said, it did not mean that they were not looking forward to it. During the rainy season, torrential rain descended. The river overlords roared as they headed downstream in groups. Those wood-eating bugs also gradually left. Most of the creatures in the river followed the giant beasts downstream. When the two moons met again, they would return from the sea. There were also some that, like the frogs, appeared for a period of time, then went to other places that no one knew of and disappeared. This time, Xiao Xian planned to use the time between the end of the rainy season and the reunion of the two moons to sail the boat. At the end of the rainy season, everyone in the tribe, from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, from the elderly to the children, put down other things at hand and gathered beside the path of glory. "Move it out." The shaman stood at the top of the mountain and said. Ao and the two team leaders, as well as a few able-bodied warriors, carefully moved the canoe out of the wooden shed. The canoe was nearly 3 meters wide at its widest point and 10 meters long. It was shaped like a shuttle. The reason why it was so big was to make it easier for Cha-Cha to rest inside. If it was only Xiao Xian, there would be no need for such a big canoe. Xiao Xian had to choose the type of tree that was used to make the canoe. The hunting team had gone out to find all kinds of samples and brought them back for Xiao Xian to choose. After Xiao Xian had made his choice, Ao and the others went to cut down the best tree and brought it back. The canoe was made by Xiao Xian and several of the tribe's top stoneware craftsmen, including Old Ku. They hollowed out the middle of the tree they had cut down and made a large and nimble canoe. The canoe was relatively simple to make, and there was no risk of it falling apart. The blueprint was also drawn by Xiao Xian himself. When he was drawing, he also consulted the other old warriors in the tribe. Maybe they didn't know anything about canoes, but they knew some useful techniques. Xiao Xian then made some changes based on their suggestions. After the blueprint was finished the stoneware craftsmen went to cut down a lot of wood to practice at home. After all, there is a big difference between wood and stoneware, so they didn't dare to do anything rashly. When they were confident and got the hang of it, they would come back to finish the canoe together. This canoe wasn't that heavy for many totem warriors in the tribe. Normally, they could even carry stones, so how hard would it be for them to carry wood? But at this moment, it was carried by several senior totem warriors, and they would carry it down the mountain later. This was a kind of respect, a kind of solemn etiquette. Xiao Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. The shaman was drawing patterns on his face, just like the warriors who went out to hunt. It was a kind of blessing, which meant that the tribe attached great importance to this. Even Cha-Cha's feet were drawn by the shaman with the tribe's totem, imitating the giant eagle at Eagle Mountain. After finishing the drawing, Xiao Xian bowed towards the fire pit and then walked to the canoe. Together with the others carrying the canoe, they walked down the path of glory. Cha-Cha directly flew up into the air and flew over. Behind the canoe, the shaman and the other elders of the tribe followed. Some of them were excited, some were worried, and some looked calm, but the twitching of their muscles showed that they weren't. At this time, many people were easily overthinking, worrying about their gains and losses. This was related to the ancestors' wishes, so how could they be calm? Beside the path of glory, the crowd followed the canoe. Adults with children, disabled people with crutches, or supported by others, followed closely. Everyone sang the hunting song and the prayer song. At first, only the people on the mountain sang, but soon, the people at the foot of the mountain sang as well. The whole tribe sang the same song with the same rhythm and pace. Some were young, some were old, some were sharp, and some were rough. To them, singing represented everything they were feeling at the moment. Most of the people in the tribe weren't good at expressing their emotions and thoughts. Singing was a form of expression. This was the first time they sang the hunting song without the impatient killing intent before the hunt. Instead, they sang with fearlessness, without fear, and with hope. On this day, the whole tribe collectively sent Xiao Xian off. What was on the other side of the river? They didn't know, and they never thought of finding out. In many people's eyes, Xiao Xian's actions were worthy of respect, but they didn't think that Xiao Xian could safely cross the river. This river was too dangerous. What a brave warrior! After the canoe was transported down the mountain, Ao and the others carefully pushed it into the river. The canoe that was made was classified as a side canoe. The so-called side canoe was a canoe that was attached to one side or both sides of the canoe and was shaped like a boat that was floating in the same direction as the canoe. Xiao Xian's design was a side canoe. Because of this, he once played with it when he was traveling abroad. The side canoe overcame the instability of the canoe that was prone to sway sideways and capsizing in the wind and waves. It also possessed the advantages of the canoe's lightness and structural integrity. It was also a tool used by the Aboriginals for ocean voyaging. The sail was also the most important part of the boat. Now, it was set up with a sail made of leaves and vines. The vines were thin, but very strong vines found in the hunting grounds. The best women in the tribe weaved them into an inverted triangular sail. In the eyes of the shamanists and the others, they didn't know if this kind of material would be useful, so it was best to prepare more. But because the vines were hard to find, in the end, they only managed to weave 2 pieces. One piece was installed, and the other piece was used as a backup. They didn't know if a backup piece would be enough. When Xiao Xian was learning from the Aborigines, he learned that the side canoe could travel more than 200 kilometers a day. But here, Xiao Xian wasn't so sure. After connecting the side canoe with the side canoe, Xiao Xian checked every place and the things he needed to bring. Xiao Xian stood in the canoe and looked at the densely packed people on shore. Caesar carried Old Ku and also stood on the shore. He looked at Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha, who landed in the canoe. He also wanted to follow, but Xiao Xian couldn't bring him along. If there was any danger on the river, Xiao Xian could let Cha-Cha carry him. But Caesar couldn't, and Cha-Cha couldn't carry him. If Cha-Cha was about the same size as the giant eagles in Eagle Mountain, He could carry many people. Unfortunately, Cha-Cha was still small. Goodbye. I'm leaving. Xiao Xian bowed to the people on the shore. Under the leadership of the shamaness and the chief, the people on the shore also bowed to Xiao Xian. This was a situation that had never happened in thousands of years. To the people of the tribe, Xiao Xian was their hope to leave this place. If Xiao Xian didn't succeed, then no one knew how long it would take for them to leave this place. Maybe even after 1,000 years, they would still be stuck in the same place. With a pull of the sail, the canoe sailed away with the wind. The sail was very big. If it weren't for the totemic warrior's great strength, Xiao Xian might not be able to operate it. Cha-Cha, the big guy, stood in the canoe and looked around curiously. To him, this was a very novel experience. He could actually stand on the river. However, such a big boat was still too small for Cha-Cha. After standing for a while, he flew up to the sky and flew in the direction Xiao Xian pointed. He still had more freedom in the sky. When he was tired of flying, he would return to the boat to rest. On the shore, the prayer song sounded. It was a collective chorus. Xiao Xian looked back and saw that the people on the shore were getting smaller and smaller. The house on the mountain gradually became a blurry dot. The mountain that he had lived in for nearly 8 years was gradually disappearing at the point where the water met the sky, just like the riverbank. Besides the sound of the wind, there was no other sound. Looking at the direction of the sun in the sky and feeling the slight change in the wind, Xiao Xian adjusted the sail and looked ahead. Chapter 152. Sailing on the river was very boring, but they had to be vigilant at all times to prevent anything from jumping out of the water. They also had to pay attention to the direction of the wind, so they didn't have to go back after traveling for half a day. From the end of the rainy season, the day they set off, until the 2 moons coincided, Xiao Xian calculated that there was less than 30 days of safe time. Xiao Xian didn't know how wide the river was, so he could only try his best to go forward. If he still couldn't see the situation on the other side of the river after 15 days, then he could only turn back. Otherwise, the river level would drop rapidly and eventually fall into a bottomless abyss. At that time, even if he wanted to fly, he wouldn't be able to. The piranhas in the river were very active. Without the suppression of other giant beasts, from time to time, some energetic fish would jump out of the water and bite each other. At first, there were only some small piranhas near the tribal river, but as they sailed, Xiao Xian saw many larger piranhas jump out of the water. Hua! A piranha nearly 4 meters long suddenly jumped out of the water, jumping high from one side of the canoe to the other. As it jumped, it opened its mouth wide. Before, when there were piranhas that jumped out, Xiao Xian only avoided them and didn't attack. But now, the target of this one was obviously Xiao Xian. He controlled the sail with one hand, making it avoid the big fish's path. At the same time, the tip of his foot picked up a wooden stick next to him. After catching it with his free hand, he directly hit the fish's body. The friction between the stick and the air made a whooshing sound. He didn't use a spear, but a hard wooden stick. He hit the fish hard, but he couldn't immediately make it bleed. If blood splashed, the surrounding piranhas would be attracted. At that time, Xiao Xian's hands wouldn't be able to handle it. Ha! A few fish scales were whipped out, and the piranha that was hit by the stick fell back into the water. Before it could find a target for revenge, it was surrounded by other piranhas. On its body, where it was whipped by the wooden stick where the scales fell off, there were traces of blood slowly oozing out. These blood vessels were like stimulants, stimulating the energetic piranhas around them. After whipping away the piranha, Xiao Xian put away the sail. At the same time, Cha-Cha, who was in the air, flew down, grabbed a rope, and flew up again. The other end of the rope was tied to the canoe, and Cha-Cha pulled the canoe, quickly moving it away from the bloody river. The current wind direction was not suitable for using sails, so Xiao Xian kept the sails and let Cha-Cha continue pulling. When it was tired, it would return to the canoe to rest and use the wind and the sails to continue forward. Sometimes, in addition to these piranhas of different sizes, there were other fish but those fish were only active in the water and would not jump up to cause trouble. However, if someone went into the water, it would be hard to say. As Xiao Xian was controlling the sail, he saw a fish that was much longer than the canoe slowly swimming past them. Because it was close to the surface of the river, the patterns on the fish's body could be clearly seen. Part of its spiked fins could also be seen. There were many such fish, but as long as these fish did not attack the canoe, it did not matter. Earlier, there was a big fish, probably curious about the canoe, that used its head to hit the canoe, nearly capsizing the canoe. Xiao Xian had Cha-Cha quickly pull the canoe away, but the fish did not give up, continuing to hit the canoe until Xiao Xian had Cha-Cha stop and let the fish hit the canoe a few times. Finally, the fish felt bored and left. Fish had all kinds of habits. They had to travel during the day, so they could not sleep at night. Cha-Cha stood inside the canoe to rest, while Xiao Xian had to adjust the sail after a short nap. He also had to maintain vigilance. Although it was difficult, and there would be problems every day, they were all small problems that could be solved. Xiao Xian counted the number of days and roughly estimated the distance they had traveled. It had been 8 days, but they still did not see the riverbank, nor did they see any small islands or other places that protruded from the surface of the river. All they could see was the river water. He took out the roasted meat jerky from the animal skin bag and ate some. He also drank the water on the boat sparingly. Before he finished drinking the water, Xiao Xian would not drink water from the river. Cha-Cha ate in the air. Sometimes when it caught a fish, it would directly fly in the air a little further away from the canoe. This way, the dripping blood would not cause any trouble for the canoe. While eating, Xiao Xian suddenly found a small island that protruded from the surface of the river diagonally ahead. He quickly adjusted the sail and headed there. However, as he got closer, Xiao Xian discovered that it was not a small island, but a huge fish. It was just that this fish was already dead and was floating on the surface of the water. Moreover, Xiao Xian also discovered that there were many holes in the fish's body, which were bitten through. The fish, which was more than 20 meters long, was eaten until only its skeleton and a layer of incomplete skin was left. Xiao Xian could also see from the bitten holes that there were still things inside the fish's body that were still gnawing. There were some small fish inside with slender bodies. Looking at them alone, they were not conspicuous. But it was these small fish, which were not even as big as a palm, that gnawed this huge fish with sharp teeth and thick armor on its body until only its skeleton was left. Perhaps, after a while, even the bones and the skin full of holes would be gone. Xiao Xian quickly adjusted the sail and left this place. He also gestured to Cha-Cha, who had just finished eating in the air, to come down and see the fate of this huge beast. Be careful when you catch fish in the future. If you find these small fish, quickly throw them away. Xiao Xian said, "Ayo." When Cha-Cha saw the fate of the big fish, it shook its wings. It probably did not expect such a situation. After the canoe sailed a distance away, Xiao Xian looked back and saw that the big fish that was originally floating on the surface of the water was sinking. It was almost completely eaten. Perhaps sometimes those ferocious and huge fish were not the biggest threat to people sailing on the water. Those inconspicuous fish were more likely to cause danger. Xiao Xian thought that Cha-Cha would rest for a while before continuing to fly into the air to pull the canoe. Unexpectedly, Cha-Cha stood on the canoe like a quail, crouching there with its neck shrunk. Its head was looking up at the sky, as if there was something in the sky that it was afraid of. "What's wrong?" Xiao Xian asked as he tapped Cha-Cha's bird head. He did not see anything in the sky, but he felt a great pressure in his heart. Cha-Cha called out softly, but its neck shrunk even tighter. Its eyes were still staring at the sky, but it did not fly up. The canoe gradually came to a stop. The wind that was blowing the sails had also stopped. Xiao Xian looked at the sky. He soon realized that the clouds in the sky had dispersed, revealing a large, empty area. It was really developing towards a cloudless sky. If it was any other day, this would indeed be considered a sunny day. But here, it gave people a feeling of great pressure and fear. Not only Cha-Cha, but Xiao Xian also felt a sense of trembling, not daring to move. However, the current situation had to be resolved. The number of piranhas in the surroundings seemed to have decreased by a lot. Even a large fish that swam by from time to time could not be seen. It was really calm. But this calm phenomenon was too strange. A scene suddenly appeared in front of Xiao Xian's eyes. A large amount of fog was rising from the river. The fog looked very ordinary, with a sense of boundless fog. However, to be able to use this method to warn Xiao Xian, it was definitely not something ordinary. Xiao Xian took out the long-handled paddles from the canoe and began to row vigorously. "What are you still doing there? Hurry up and help. Otherwise, we will all die," Xiao Xian said to Cha-Cha. Cha-Cha looked at the sky, grabbed the two long-handled paddles beside him, turned over, and began to row using the method that he had practiced many times in the tribe. With Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha's vigorous paddling, the canoe began to move quickly. Xiao Xian did not care about anything else. He only held back his strength and rowed with all his might. He did not even worry that the splashes would attract the attention of the other big fish. With the sound of the paddling, the canoe moved forward quickly. Xiao Xian's two arms became blurry. When both of his arms began to feel sore and tired, Xiao Xian picked up a stone needle and shot it into the air. When the needle was about 100 meters above the water, it let out a bang sound and instantly turned into fine powder. Seeing this, Cha-Cha was so frightened that he almost threw away the paddle. Xiao Xian also felt his scalp go numb. Under the clear, cloudless sky, something that made one's hair stand on end was happening in such a calm and eerie manner. "It's coming down. Hurry, row." Xiao Xian continued to row. This time, Cha-Cha was also anxious. In his panic, he broke the handle of the paddle, and the two paddles fell into the water. Cha-Cha did not bother to go back to pick them up. He grabbed the other two paddles in the canoe, wishing that he could grow two more nimble hands to row the paddles. The canoe moved quickly, like a speedboat with a high-horsepower engine, rushing forward. "Hurry, hurry, hurry." The pressure above their heads was getting stronger and stronger. Cha-Cha's feathers were all standing up. During the vigorous paddling, a feather fell from Cha-Cha's body, but was lifted up by Cha-Cha's vigorous paddling. Because there was no wind, the feather did not float high, about 20 meters. However, at this height of 20 meters above the water, the feather, like the stone needle, instantly turned into powder. Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha did not raise their heads to look. They did not have time to care about anything else. The pressure above them was still there, and it was still descending. If Xiao Xian could not escape, he would end up like the stone needle and the fallen feather. Xiao Xian was sweating all over. The sweat on his forehead slid into his eyes, and he felt a stinging pain. He did not bother to wipe it off, but quickly blinked twice. He was still staring forward, and his hands did not slow down at all. He did not calculate the time, and he could not calculate it. Xiao Xian did not know what was descending and what its speed was. He could only focus all his attention on paddling and controlling the direction to escape in a straight line. After rowing for an unknown amount of time, Xiao Xian heard a bang from behind. He woke up from his trance. The pressure above their heads was no longer there. Turning his head, he saw water vapor rising from the river behind him. Moreover, the water vapor was still increasing, like a thick fog. The canoe was still moving. Xiao Xian looked at the bird lying on its back and using all its strength to paddle. He lifted his leg and kicked it. "Okay, we're over." Cha-Cha was still immersed in paddling. When it was kicked by Xiao Xian, it was so frightened that it almost spread its wings and flew up. If Xiao Xian's hands were not fast enough, the two wooden paddles would have been lost again. The calm water surface rippled again, and the wind blew. Xiao Xian adjusted the sails, and with the help of the wind, they continued to move forward. As for Cha-Cha, he would let it rest for a while. It probably could not fly now. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.